The moonlight fell on the deserted street through thick clouds. The warm wind shook the trees around the building. Through the window of the building, we could see young men sitting at their desks, one of them drawing something in a notebook. It was a guy whose name was Chen Gil. He was twirling a pen in his hand, trying to complete his images in the notebook. Gil knew that everyone saw him as a diligent middle school student. It brought him joy. He was sure that there were no difficulties he couldn't handle, and he was proud of that. But something in Gil's eyes told him that there was a task that was causing him difficulty in solving it. This difficulty for Gil was a problematic but very beautiful girl with whom the guy fell in love. The girl, not paying attention to what the teacher was telling her, turned to Gil and asked him to do her homework for her. She was going on a quest in the evening. Gil was glad he was the one she asked to do the assignments. Blushing slightly, he agreed. The beautiful classmate's name was Xiao Mei, and Jill dared to talk to her, but the teacher intervened and kicked the girl out of class. Before the girl left the classroom, Jill asked if he could play a game with her. Xiao Mei silently stood up and was almost at the door the teacher pointed out to her, making Gil nervous. But suddenly, the girl turned around and gave a positive answer to Gil, indicating the time and place of the quest. After class, it suddenly started to rain, and the boy hoped that he could get home before the game started. On the way home, Gil thought about his beloved and about people saving electricity so that the game would go off without a hitch. A drenched Gil entered his house and let his mom know he was home and that classes were over. His mom was surprised that his son was back earlier than usual, but Jill told his mom that they had been let out early because of the weather. It was raining like a bucket outside, so Mom suggested that Jill change his clothes and rest so she could finish cooking dinner. Jill was hungry and didn't want to wait. He suggested that Mom order food delivery. Mom was fine with that, adding that she would leave the food outside his room. Upon entering the room, Jill noticed a box labeled Cosmos that was lying on the floor in the hallway. Mom was surprised to hear that Jill was playing games. She wanted her son to give himself more time to relax. She didn't mind that he started playing games, but she was worried that he would forget to eat when he was playing. Mom noticed that he was in a hurry and assumed that he had arranged to play with someone, perhaps in a hurry because of some girl. Gil knew that Cosmos was now the most popular VR game for today's youth around the world. This game requires only one helmet and nothing else, with the help of which you can fully immerse yourself in the virtual world. Gil was worried because he had no gaming experience, and this game would be his first game. He thought that Xiao Mei was already an expert in this game. He lay down on the bed and raised the helmet above his head, examining it once more. Then his confidence returned. While he was looking at the helmet, he got a message on his phone from a girl inviting him to the game. Gil put the helmet on the charger so he wouldn't fall out of the game, put it on his head, and prepared to dive into the game. Jill was looking forward to meeting the girl he was in love with. It could be considered their first date. Unexpectedly, Gil felt the process of immersion into the virtual world through the Cosmos helmet. The loading process began. The first thing that Gil felt was the touch of his foot in something wet. In anticipation of what would happen next, Gil held his breath. Jill found himself in a room whose floor was made of squares. With caution, Jill began to take the first steps. In the distance was visible triangle with the name of the game. From it came pleasant music and sounds of falling drops of water. A sharp beam of light blinded Gil. He had to cover his face with his hands. He tried to see where the light was coming from. A game window appeared in front of him, thanking him for buying the game, as well as a voiceover that welcomed Gil to the game. Gil was impressed by the graphics and the game's design. He wanted to learn more about what was waiting for him. Abruptly, the welcome screen changed to a blank white screen, which caused the guy a lot of questions. A warning text appeared on the screen, which indicated that this game was a test and survival game. Gil realized that he was in for an incredible adventure. The game offered him to choose a class and dive into the virtual world. He could not decide for a long time what class he would rather play. He remembered the words of the girl who mentioned Supporter. In the list of options offered to him, there was no mention of Supporta. Then Gil decided to choose what he liked, and he chose Hilaire. After selecting a class, Jill had to choose the clothes he wanted to play in. He wanted something official that Xiao Mei would like. Jill completed all the customizations, and the game transformed him into a fancy suit that fit him perfectly. All the clothes on Jill changed very quickly. The guy was shocked at the costume he was wearing. The game showed Gil his new image, which was chosen by the guy himself. Strict black suit, perfectly suited for a date with a girl. The process of loading the game began. The guy was waiting impatiently for the beginning, but suddenly he heard that the weather had worsened, and it was necessary to turn off the electrical appliances. The weather took an unexpected turn. It started to rain heavily, which was accompanied by thunder and lightning. One of the lightning bolts struck right in Gil's house. The whole house was struck by sparks and bright light from the strike. The sky rose above Gil's house. Nature raged. The lightning bolt hit the power supply from Jill's helmet and shorted it out. The current could be seen rushing out and damaging everything around him. Jill sat in his helmet and waited for the game to load, listening to music, unaware of the danger that was creeping up on him. The guy raved about his first date with Xiao Mei. He dreamed of seeing the girl. The current was almost ready to breed Gil's head. A sharp, strong, penetrating current shot through Gil's entire body. Who could do nothing about it? He was at the mercy of the electricity. Gil couldn't call for help. His whole body was shackled. He didn't understand what was happening to him and how to stop it. Another powerful discharge lifted Gil above the bed, penetrating even deeper into his body. From the windows of Gil's house, bright beams of light streamed out onto the street, as if someone were conducting dangerous experiments in a laboratory. The bad weather had de-energized everything around him, and all the houses and buildings were plunged into total darkness. The light coming from the moon. After the electrocution, the helmet flew off the guy on the floor. It was badly damaged. It was defective. There was a knock on the door of Gil's room. His mom asked to check if all the equipment was turned off, but there was no answer, and she decided to go in. She was surprised to see that her son wasn't there, and from the light that came from the window, she found a helmet lying on the bed. The monsters who came out of the forest tried to scare their victim. They shouted, opened their mouths, waved their swords. The girl was terrified, surrounded by monsters. Her sword for defense was broken. She tried to give battle to the nasty creatures, but eventually she was surrounded. In desperation, the poor girl screamed and called for help, hoping that she would be heard and rescued from the clutches of the monsters. A bright burst of light distracted the monsters from the massacre of the girl. They could not understand what was happening, where the light came from. The sound of breaking branches came from the forest, as if someone huge was tearing through the trees, who was determined to get to the monsters. The girl looked up and saw that all the monsters had been killed by the beautiful hero who had saved her. She recognized her savior. It was Gil. Jill was scared and worried about Xiao Mei. He was sorry that he was delayed in traveling and let the monsters surround her. She was not in danger. The girl's eyes shone with happiness. She was amazed by Gil. Her hand touched his hand. He was a real hero to her. The girl reached her lips to Gil, softly saying his name. The guy excitedly said her name, and now their lips came together in a passionate kiss. Gil was puzzled and asked the girl to take her time in kissing him, her tongue literally licking his lips. He found his face drooling from the kiss. He opened his eyes and saw a nasty lizard in front of him kissing him. Gil jumped up, throwing the lizard off him. He shouted the girl's name loudly and couldn't believe he had dreamed it all. After sitting up for a while and coming to his senses, Gil realized that it was a dream, and he was kissing the lizard who was running away, eating a bug. Gil was shocked that it was all incredibly realistic, but it all disappeared in an instant. Gil began to look around. He found that there was a tingling sensation of electricity all over his body, but he liked the feeling. It was pleasant. He got up, walked around, looked around, sweat dripping down his face. It was getting hotter and hotter, and a thought came into his head about his whereabouts. Soon he realized that he was in the game itself. There were burning sands around him. A cave storm was coming. He was in the desert. Gil felt the scorching desert sun. He couldn't believe how realistic everything seemed. He thought his first time, the game was supposed to load him into a newbie village, but there was no one alive in the desert but him. Gil decided to text his favorite Xiao Mei and called up the game's hero search window. He entered a name and clicked search. After completing the search, the game gave a result that Gil didn't expect. A player with that name didn't exist. Gil was puzzled, as this could not happen. He was sure he had memorized her ID correctly. After trying a few more times, he decided to go to the newcomer's village, hoping that the girl was waiting for him there. He had been walking through the desert for hours now. His clothes were soaked from the heat, and the cape on his head did not save him from the merciless sun. Gil wanted to know how long he had to walk and where he was at the moment, so he called up the Cosmos map. Looking at the map carefully, Gil found that the village was not marked, or even there was no village at all. He thought he might have made a mistake from the unbearable heat. He couldn't figure out where he was and where to go next. The game gave him a notification that GM connection had started, and he had to wait. The loading took longer, and he couldn't get a connection to the server. Gil started to worry. A while later, a message appeared stating that Gil was outside the service area, which made him angry. Gil found out that there was no connection to the help desk either, which was suspicious and made him even angrier. He decided to do the math to find out how many milliliters of sweat a person produces on a hot day. This calmed him down. Gil came to the conclusion that he would soon be fainting and dehydrated. It was weighing on him heavily. He wanted to stop the game and quit so that there would be a chance to discuss the difficulty of the game with Xiao Mei. After Gil confirmed his desire to quit the game in the program window, a new notification popped up to inform him that it was impossible to quit the game. Gil froze in place, his eyes conveying the shock he was in. He couldn't believe that he couldn't quit the game. Gil kept poking his finger at the quit button. but to no avail, he thought it was a joke and continued to press the button. Instead of logging out of the game, the screen was flooded with notifications that there was an unauthorized exit. Their sound was deafening to the guy. Gil did not want to give up and poked at everything he saw on the screen. He realized that he would not be able to leave the game, and he almost resigned himself to it. After another unauthorized exit notification, Gil wondered what it could mean and how to solve the problem. Gil became nervous and angry. He thought he was locked in the game and would not be able to leave it. He did not know what to do in this situation. Unexpectedly for Gil, there was a notification about getting a new task. In a bewilderment, the guy did not know what it meant. On the screen with his task was all the necessary information for Gil. He still could not understand what awaited him and how to complete the task. Gil was desperate. He just wanted to play with the girl he liked. He thought he was cursed. The guy got really angry at everything that was coming at him. He hit the sand with all his might with his fist to relieve some of the stress. Gil calmed down and sat down on the sand. He tried every possible option to leave the game, but all was unsuccessful. He was frustrated and thought about the fact that he was stuck in the game forever, no chance of getting out. Gil got up and went without knowing where he was going, thinking that his faith in his own strength was fading as he spent time in the game. He caught himself thinking that this virtual world was very similar to the real one, and almost got used to the idea that he would never get out of the game. The heat was making Gil nauseous and a little dizzy, and he knew that if he didn't do anything about it, he could die. But he didn't want to die. He had never had such a desire to live. Thinking a little, Gil decided to seek water at any cost. Suddenly, a small pebble caught his eye, and Gil began to remember his grandfather watching a survival show, and there was a mention of this rock. He finally remembered that this type of rock is found close to a water source, and his eyes lit up with hope for the best. Gil assumed that the water would be found where there was a lot of shale, which was the name of the rock, and he followed the rock. After gathering his strength and resting a little, he decided to go to the source of life to drink water. Gil walked through the desert in search of water from the scorching sun. He did not look around him and did not expect danger. He just wanted to find water. But the desert, wild beasts had their own plans for fresh flesh, which was coming to them for dinner. Gil came to a rock he knew and decided to catch his breath a little so that he could continue his journey. He hoped that his journey would not be in vain and that his assumptions would be correct, or he would die. Gil heard the sound of a drop that had just fallen from a cave stone. It was the sound of hope. Gil stood at the entrance to the cave. He saw a bowl with a drop of water in it. He realized that he had done the right thing and he was about to taste the water. He was almost dehydrated. His mouth was dry and sweat was dripping down his face. He was getting closer and closer to the water. Gil was happy to drink the water. He completely immersed his head into the bowl and began to drink the water greedily. He drank it as if it was the last time in his life. It was the most delicious water. Gil could not quench his thirst. It seemed to him that the more he drank the water, the more he wanted it. When Gil had drunk, he took the water in his palms and began to wash his face. The thought flashed through his mind, how nice it is to be alive. But his joyful moment was interrupted by a wild animal. A hungry beast stood at the entrance to the cave, preparing to attack the boy. The unsuspecting Gil was lying on the ground. Satisfied that he had quenched his thirst, he had drunk a lot of water and now it was difficult for him to move. He had only one thought in his mind, how he could leave the game and get out of it. He couldn't get enough of the idea of quitting the game. He decided to open the map and look at it again. He thought that if it was a game, and he was in the desert, he should look for a clue in the desert itself. But unfortunately, the map only showed the explored area of the desert. He realized that it wouldn't be easy. Gil decided that it would be useful to study the data of the system thoroughly, to know how and what to prepare for, and what skills he had. He found that he had very poor performance and could only rely on his quick feet, and he didn't understand what set conditions were. Gil decided to see what equipment options were available to improve his performance and thereby protect himself. He chose new gloves and a sword, weapons he thought would be very useful in an unknown place. He was surprised that the system allowed him to take a sword. He thought that a support was not supposed to have a weapon. Gil got up and began to put on his equipment. He put on his gloves, picked up his sword, and felt protected and strong. When he finished with the outfit, the guy thought that he needed some practice with the sword and started swinging it in different directions. He had no sword skills. He imagined the danger in front of him and used the sword to try to solve the problem. He imagined how he pressed the sword into someone's chest. These exercises gave him strength. After fighting with a shadow, Gil decided to test the sword on something tangible, and with all his might, he hit a stone lying next to him. The sword cut the stone in half. The guy was surprised. Gil saw how strong and powerful the sword was. He recognized that it was much stronger than in the real world. When the sword tests were finished, a window appeared that showed the strength of the weapon. Gil was surprised that the game had a lot of visualization. Suddenly, Gil heard growling near the entrance of the cave. He prepared his sword and waited for the unknown beast to enter him. But suddenly the growling stopped. Gil hid but remained cautious. He had no idea what it could be and decided to scramble for food. There was a sound behind his back. Something fell loudly in the depths of the cave. The boy sensed danger again. Gil turned his head in the direction of the sound. He couldn't understand where it was coming from and who was making it. The ignorance made him stunned. Gil stood still for a while and decided to go deeper into the cave to explore it. Surprisingly, it was quite spacious. He was no longer thirsty. He wanted to look around. He walked carefully, keeping his guard up, looking around carefully. Suddenly, a bone fell out of a dark corner right in front of Gil. He was upset. He thought it was a bone from a man, which horrified him. Gil's eyes were full of terror. Droplets of sweat began to run down his face again, and goosebumps of creepiness ran down his back. Gil pulled himself together and decided to walk a little further to determine whose remains they were. Behind the large stones, he found a mountain of different bones and skulls of unknown creatures. He caught himself wondering where this pile of bones had come from, what had killed them, and why they had been here for so long. Picking up a bone that fell in front of his feet, the guy remembered that he had already seen a photo of similar teeth marks that were on the bone. When Gil remembered who left such marks, it became clear that the matter was bad and he had to look for a safe place. He turned and ran in the opposite direction. He couldn't stay there. It was getting more dangerous. With a sharp movement, the predator swung at Gil, and the guy already saw an open mouth with sharp teeth and long claws. He did not immediately realize what kind of beast it was. But Gil's reaction was high, and he managed to dodge the wild beast. He crouched down and the jaws closed right above his head. With a terrible force, he heard the clatter of teeth. The beast stood in the darkness. His eyes were visible, two huge, angry red eyes. The guy stood opposite and waited for him to attack him. The game gave Jim a clue that before him was a desert wolf, TK, as there was a description of its characteristics that possessed the beast. This information will help Gil in the fight with him. The first small drop of blood fell and crashed to the ground. It looked like the beast hit the guy a little bit. During the attack, the wolf reached speeds of up to 65 kilometers per hour. Gil knew that the main type of attack of the wolf was a bite, which was up to 200 kilograms in strength. He also knew its weak point was its belly, which was difficult to reach. The guy realized that the monster was still here and was following him, waiting for Gil to get into a tight spot so he could attack him. The wolf was looking straight at the guy. He was ready to attack. His mouth was drooling. He was ready to tear Gil to pieces. He couldn't run. The wolf was faster than him. Gil had all the options in his head not to fight him, but unfortunately, there was only one way to get away from the wolf, and that was to kill him. The boy slowly began to draw his sword to start the fight with the beast. He was sure that he could defeat the wolf. Gil knew that he couldn't lose. He didn't want to die, so he could see in his eyes that he was ready to take this hard fight. He swung his sword and let the wolf know that he was not to be underestimated, that he would be a difficult opponent, and that his will to live was stronger than his fear. After a few attacks, Gil felt that something was going wrong. It felt like he was losing his strength, even though he wasn't attacking at full power. A system window appeared in front of him with a short notice, from which Gil realized what the problem was. It turned out that his health was running out. He needed treatment. Gil had a flashback to when he was in his first year of high school, a class that brought him joy. Gil had studied kendo and went to a club where he was the head of the kendo club. He was proud of himself for reaching that level. The guy spent days on end practicing with a wooden sword at the club. He was honing his sword skills. He wanted to be the best at it. In swordsmanship, it was important how you moved, so Gil practiced hard on his movements and stances. He already had several awards that he won in competitions. He was the youngest master in the country with a 6th Dan in kendo. His training was paying off. He knew he was doing it right. Many people did not understand why the guy was studying this kind of martial art, but the reason was simple. Once he watched a kendo competition on TV, he saw how other masters fight. The tournament had a positive impact on the choice of classes for the guy. Another reason why Gil chose kendo was his mom. In his youth, she was a fan of this sport and often watched it on TV with her son. She was obsessed with the star of the sport at the time, Kimura. She was happy when she saw him on the screen. After watching it, she always kissed me a few times on the cheek. Gil always remembered his mom bringing him to classes at an early age, when he was more interested in hanging out with other kids on the street. At first, he thought that kendo was easy. You just had to wear nice clothes and fight with your opponents, but it was more complicated than that. After Gil started to get involved in the training process, he realized that the movements in kendo are not simple, and in some places even difficult, but he did not give up. When he found himself in front of an opponent, it became even more difficult, because sometimes emotions were running high. Gil realized that he was getting excited. His heart was jumping out of his chest, his breathing was hitching, He had to pull himself together and calm down. At his first competition, the shroud of terror had enveloped him tightly, and at such moments his body had stopped obeying him and he could barely get it to move. Gil stood and thought that the source of all this horror was coming, and before he could finish the thought, he was attacked by the opponent opposite. Then the guy lost but gained valuable experience. He realized that the source of his fear was his own weakness, so he began to train even harder. Each training session was not easy for him. He wanted to finish, but reminded himself that constant work on himself is a constant overcoming of his laziness. That's why the guy spent all his free time in the dojo. He repeated each movement many times, while others were walking and lazy to do anything. At times when he was constantly losing, he knew that he could do better and continued to improve himself in sword technique. The constant exercise in the dojo was necessary, and without the injuries that accompanied him all the time, both in training and competition. The sword was always in his hands, and he continued to make sword swings even when he had almost no strength left. This continued until Gil was successful. When he became a master with a 6th Dan, his training was not in vain. Gil knew that in the world where the law of the jungle reigns, you need to be in perfect mastery of weapons. You never know what lies ahead. The guy always thought that it was impossible to predict how terrifying your next opponent would be, so he practiced a lot. After all the memories that had been triggered by the wolf's appearance, Gil decided it was time for a battle. Gil swung his sword once more to attack and again thought that he shouldn't underestimate him. He was a tough nut to crack. After attacking the wolf, he couldn't understand what was wrong, why his attacks didn't work. But then suddenly the wolf approached him, and now he was already conducting his attack. He hit Gil with all his might with his tail. From such a strong blow, Gil flew into the wall, from which he received a lot of damage. The blow was so strong that the stones from the wall fly in different directions. Gil began to rise and laugh loudly, hysterically. He did not see the moment of the attack and did not have time to dodge or defend himself from it. The guy swung his sword with all his might, hitting the wolf with incredible force, but the sword didn't do any damage to the wolf. Gil was confused. After another useless attacks, the game system reminded Gil that all his attacks are useless. The wolf has a powerful armor. You can kill him only by hitting him in the belly. Before he could even think about it, the guy saw the evil predator running at him at a great speed. He had to do something. Gil barely had time to dodge, and again the jaw with sharp teeth flashed past his head. At that moment, it became clear to him about his weak point, and he thought about how he could hit it. But there was a problem he didn't know how to solve. The wolf was incredibly fast and agile. It was trying to gnaw the guy to death every time. Gil knew that constant defense would get him nowhere, and eventually the wolf would get the upper hand. The guy's back was against the wall, and he didn't know what to do to defeat the ferocious beast, which wouldn't stop attacking him. The wolf looked at him with a grin, and at that moment Gil thought that he was destined to die in this place. Every now and then, he would get a notification that he was running out of health, and at those moments he had no hope of survival. Gil didn't want to give up, and he didn't want to die, so he finally pulled himself together and figured out how to get to the wolf's belly. He sprinted and started attacking the wolf with the thought that if it worked, there would be a chance to inflict fatal damage on it. The guy was sure that it would work and he would finish him off. He kept running towards the wolf, who started to move in response. They approached each other and each wanted to launch their own attack, not knowing which one would prevail. Drops of blood spilled onto the cold ground. It was not clear whose blood it was, for both were attacking each other at the same time. Gil stood with his sword in his hands, and on his shoulder, with its huge teeth, hung a wolf, which was ready to throw the guy to the ground. The wolf's eyes looked straight into Gil's eyes. They both froze and thought about their next move. The wolf clenched his teeth even harder and blood rushed to the ground. The wolf let his guard down, which Gil took advantage of. He thrust his sword right into the wolf's belly, piercing it through. Almost exhausted, Gil finally successfully reached the wolf with his attack. His plan had worked. He was glad of it. As the wolf fell off the dead wolf, Gil realized that he had the victory. He had more confidence in his own strength. Gil deliberately let the wolf bite him. He had no other option to get to the belly, and this plan worked perfectly. Gil was starting to like the game. After the fight, a notification screen appeared. The desert wolf was defeated. The guy got 6,000 points and Gil reached level 5. He also got 25 skill points for defeating the wolf. Gil read the information carefully and proudly closed the notice. He was glad to be alive. After receiving the new level, all the wounds on Gil's body healed. He was as good as new. He was happy. A strange notification appeared in front of him that informed Gil that a hidden level trading platform had been launched. He didn't know what it meant. Gil didn't understand what was going on and was wary of everything. He turned around and couldn't understand what the program was running. Everywhere around him began to appear various windows with armor and weapons. The guy realized that on the platform he could buy something. In addition to various weapons and armor in the distance, Gil saw something familiar and could not believe what he saw. He was furious with the developers of the game because he saw a beautiful girl like his favorite Xiao Mei on the couch. He even thought that they wanted to keep him in the game forever. After seeing this, Gil reminded himself that he was in a game, and games were characterized by giving points for killing different creatures, and leveling up gave points to distribute. He clicked on the game menu, and again he came across the marketplace section. He wondered what it was. He wanted to be there. Gil selected the marketplace section and clicked enter. He would find out what he could buy there, and for how much. After clicking enter, everything around him began to glow. He had to squint his eyes to see what was going on around him. There were various blades, swords, weapons of various kinds, and the exact characteristics of them, which was convenient for choosing a weapon. There were so many things on the platform that Gil opened his mouth at what he saw. He did not know what to choose, because there was a lot of goods. He saw a very interesting sword called Golden Glory. Its characteristics inspired confidence in Gil. When the guy familiarized himself with the goods, he understood what the trading platform was and continued to get acquainted with the contents. Gil had little experience in the game, and his level as a player didn't allow him to unlock all the items, because unlocking the inventory costs a level. In addition to weapons and armor in the list was usually equipment with household appliances. This fact puzzled the guy. No one will buy such appliances in a survival game for a huge amount. Gil also discovered the mercenary system, but for it the game required the player to have at least level 100, and the guy was only level 5. He was curious what would happen when selecting mercenaries, so he decided to explore this section. Suddenly, a girl with a masked face popped up in front of him. She had an unusual purple hair color. She was very attractive, but the girl was not simple. In an instant, she pointed the sharp end of the sword at Gil. He did not expect to have to fight her. Luckily, it was a hologram, and she was not dangerous. Gil scrutinized her. The image of the girl was very attractive and dangerous. The next character was a mysterious warrior with a large round hat and pointy swords. He looked intimidating. The character named Tank was immediately fearsome. He looked deadly. He could kill his victim with one look. There was an interesting character who possessed magic and fought with it. He had long hair and sharp claws that did not look human. The assassin had a sword with which he cut his enemies like grass. His face was not visible. It was covered by a mask. On his head, he had a hood. Gil was pleasantly surprised by the variety of mercenaries. The holograms stood around him waiting for him to be chosen. Amongst all the warriors, the lad stood and couldn't afford to hire any of them. His level was too low, but he also turned his gaze past all the warriors. He saw a beautiful elf girl, who he assumed was a support. She stood out among all of them. She was beautiful and completely unarmed. She was lying on a couch when Gil approached her. He saw that she had butterflies on her ears and a small ponytail down her back. He was a little confused. Gil turned away from her feeling that he was beginning to like her, although he knew it was just a game. He didn't understand why they had invented such a helpless class. After the presentation of the mercenaries, the system notification popped up in front of him again, telling him to unclutter his daily goods. Gil thought ironically that he knew his level and what he could buy without the prompts. He used his level and unlocked items. With his level, he was able to buy 5 sugar buns and 3 Coca-Colas. Gil ate and realized that he could last for a while, but he still wanted to get out of the game. After a hearty lunch, the guy wanted to look at the stats window and asked the system to show him his stats. All of his stats were back to normal after the first test, but he still didn't know how to get new abilities, so he had to rely on increasing his stats. Gil realized that after the distribution of his points back will not be able to return them, his characteristics will directly affect the future fate of the hero. He began to go through all the possible options to improve himself. He studied what can give him armor, what can give magic. Gil remembered the recent fight with a desert wolf. He tried to use the valuable experience he had gained in the battle to accurately distribute his points. He bet on speed and damage. He already knew exactly how he was going to allocate his points. He upgraded his armor, strength, and agility. Before confirming, Gil thought again and pressed the confirm button. He knew that armor would increase his survivability, strength would help him defeat monsters in battle, and agility would make him more agile on the battlefield. The system accepted the distributed points and began to change the image of Gil. He felt that everything was changing, even his body. It was filled with strength and became more plastic. Now Gil could relax a little. He felt a pleasant strengthening of his whole body. He was ready for new adventures that awaited him ahead. As soon as all his transformations were over, a pack of desert wolves were already standing at the entrance to the cave waiting for him. Now he was ready to fight them. Gil was glad that he would be able to test his pumping results and began to draw his sword, preparing to attack. As the wolves rushed to attack, Gil went to meet them. He was sure that today he would destroy their den for good. The first wolf that approached, he chopped off the top of its head without much effort, and with the first blow, it was much stronger. Jill noticed that, unlike the last fight, his current level allowed him to damage wolves despite their strong armor. It was noticeable that his sword skill had improved with the increase in stats, and Jill had no doubt that he could easily deal with the wolves. One by one, Gil killed a wolf. He was happy with his new power. He wanted to fight and destroy wolves more and more. With each new kill, his level increased. The wolves became less and less, and Jill quickly dealt with them. After killing the last wolf, a system notification window appeared. Jill reached level 15 in the fights, got 24,000 experience points and 75 points to distribute to his characteristics. Gil was pleased with himself. He concluded that with an increased level, kill monsters much easier and faster. After finishing all the things in the cave, the young man hurried to the exit. It was night outside, the sky was sprinkled with stars, and the path of the guide lit up by the moon. Gil made a supply of water and food, and decided that while the desert was cool, it was necessary to search for a way out of the game. Not far from the cave, the road was strewn with the corpses of wolves. Not only were they killed, but there were traces of the beasts eating. It all looked eerie. Gil leaned over one of the corpses and wanted to understand why they were all dead, what had killed them, who was capable of such a thing. Not far from where Gil was, something had killed a wolf again. At an incredible speed, the guy didn't even notice it. He reached for his sword, thinking that he would be attacked soon. He tried to see the enemy, but he still couldn't. When the monster stopped killing the wolves, Gil saw him in the moonlight. He was standing on a low mountain. He looked like a man. He had fresh corpses of animals in his hands. Their gazes crossed. They both couldn't understand who was standing in front of them. They were confused. The creature saw all the information about Gil, his abilities, his characteristics, what weapons he used in battle. Gil raised one of the killed wolves on his sword. He was shocked by the way they were killed. It was as if the wolves had been sucked out of him. The guy realized that he was wrong, and to kill wolves in this way can only be another monster that knows no mercy. It was clearly not a man. Gil did not give rest to this thought. He did not know what was ahead of him, and whether he could survive in battle with the unknown. Everything around him was getting very strange. Gil was already confused in his thoughts. He was confused. He was almost certain that he had seen the silhouette of a man, judging by the corpses. There was someone there. He just disappeared, as if he was not there. Gil's thoughts flashed one after another. He assumed that he too was stuck in the game like himself. He needed to track him down. Gil picked up the wolf again and concluded that there was no blood left in the wolf's corpse. It was as if it had evaporated in the sun. He didn't suspect that he was being followed, that the other monster was following him. It moved silently and very fast. It was impossible to catch it in the dark. Gil was trying to figure out if the player could have resorted to such atrocities. It didn't seem like something a human would be capable of. He realized again that he was mistaken and thought completely wrong. To kill in such barbaric ways, another person could not. There was a very loud sound, a system notification alerting Gil to something. Danger was coming towards him. Gil saw that in the darkness behind his back, something was attacking him very quickly. The guy swung his sword with a sharp movement of his hand. There was a drop of someone's blood on the tip of the sword. Gil thought he had time to attack him first and damage him. Right in front of him fell something that looked like a tentacle, which he successfully cut off. It continued to wriggle even in this state. Because of this attack, the strength of his sword was 25%. It looked like this creature had strong armor. It was finally clear that the wolves were not killed by a human, but what killed them, it was as if it did not know fear. It only wanted to kill. The monster's legs were visible from the darkness. He was in no hurry to show himself fully. He liked to operate from the darkness. But in the light of the moon, Gil was able to see almost all of the killer. Only his face was not visible. Finally, Gil saw his face, huge teeth and a wide mouth. He had 2 pairs of tentacles on his head. He was a class above Gil. Gil was in a fighting stance with his sword in his hands. The monster raised his arm. Gil saw that in that attack he had cut off his arm. The guy immediately noticed that the battle with the wolves and this monster would be different. The monster was stronger than the wolves and it would be difficult to fight him. Gil nervously thought that if his characteristics had not increased after passing the first level, he had little chance of winning. The monster managed to damage Gil's ribs. He would have been dead if he hadn't leveled up last round. The monster just stood there watching the guy. He didn't say anything or do anything. He raised the arm that Gil had cut off, and a new arm grew in place of the old one. It had a regeneration ability. Defeating it was becoming a problem for Gil. He was stunned by one of the monster's abilities. Now, the system gave a clue to Gil. The monster in front of him was a monster whose name was Wandering Apexer, but it was not known what level he was. When his arm was fully restored, the monster was fully ready to kill Gil. It kept looking at him, instilling fear in him. The monster lived in this desert. He possessed perfect speed. In the desert, he is the top of the food chain, tries the monster with the blood of living creatures. To Gil, the monster was the most real threat to be killed. He realized he couldn't hide if the apex came out to hunt. The monster wasn't doing anything. He was just watching the reaction to his presence. Gil was ready to meet different monsters, but the summoner was on another level. He realized that its chilling power could dispel him very quickly. He had to think of something to prevent the fight from happening. Gil couldn't shake the power he saw. He took control of his body. He was nailed to the ground. The situation was getting more and more dangerous. It was the first time in his life that the guy had ever experienced such intense terror. The vertex was the most important danger that Gil didn't want to fight. Soon he realized that he was being hunted. His whole body was maximally in tension. He could not control it. The hunt began. The monster, with incredible speed, began to run at Gil, who was still confused, but the sword was in his hand at the ready. It was obvious on Gil's face that he didn't know how to defeat him, and the monster had already started his attack. Dazed with fear, he continued to stand still. The hand of the summit was already near Gil. He was ready to grab him and drink all his blood to the last drop. Unexpectedly for the monster, Gil managed to dodge the attempt to grab him. In a moment, he seemed to be as fast as the summoner. At that moment, Gil decided that he would give the fight. Despite the odds being terribly slim, he tried his attack. Gil jumped on top of the monster and he was already flying at the monster with his sword above his head. The fear gradually faded away. He decided for himself that he would not be intimidated and that he would fight until he was killed by the apex. The sword struck right on the vertex's shoulder, but did no damage to him. His armor was incredibly strong and Gil's sword would not do any damage. Gil threw another strike at the monster, but this time he managed to chop a couple antennae off its head. As the guy's sword lowered to, once again, attempt to kill the monster, Gil saw the vertex disappear from under his sword. Gil turned his head and was greatly surprised to see that the monster was already over his head. He didn't know how to defend himself. The summoner took Gil by surprise. It struck the guy in the face. At breakneck speed, the guy didn't even see the moment of impact. The monster hit Gil with such force that he was thrown far into the desert. After such a blow, the guy could die immediately. Gil hit the ground with more damage. He was powerless in this situation. He only had to wait and hope that he would not die. The guy could not slow down his fall. The speed was too high. Then he came up with the idea to use his sword. Gil stuck his sword into the ground, which slowed down the speed of his fall, but he was still flying on the ground. He managed to get to his feet with his sword so that he would take less damage from the vertex strike he received. He managed to come to a complete stop and catch his breath. He was amazed at the speed and power of the blow that the monster had successfully delivered. Wiping the blood from his face, Jim realized the speed the system was telling him about, but he didn't want to give up. Jim had just gotten to his feet, and in front of him stood the vertex ready to strike again to kill him faster. Suddenly, the word halu-kalu came out of the monster's mouth, the meaning of which only the vertex knew. After the monster said it disappeared again using its super speed, Gil stood in the same place, not understanding what the monster said to him. A new blow did not take long, and the vertex inflicted it on Gil in the chest area. The blows became harder and harder. From the received blow, the guy spat blood right on the monster's hand. He had never received such strong and accurate blows. Gil knelt down, his sword fell out of his hands to the ground, and at that moment the monster was already raising his hand for another blow. It looked like his ribs were broken and he was bleeding internally. He spat blood on the ground again. Gil thought that the last blow the monster had struck might well have killed him and ended the beating. The monster was standing near the boy again and was ready to strike again. Gil tried to understand what he was up to, what he wanted from him. The Supreme stood calmly and did not utter a single sound. He was enjoying the process of destroying the guy. He, with surprising calmness, hit Gil again for the third time and again very hard, so that Gil again flew a few meters away. Gil was trembling from the blows he had received and the damage he had done, and he didn't know how to fight back. Gil crouched down beside the trembling Gil, his sword in his hands, and he said the word halu-kalu again. Gil was shocked. He couldn't believe that the monster himself would dress him, his weapon, but why would he do that? The Supreme raised his hand, as if he wanted to show Gil, who was still lying on the ground in bewilderment. Putting his hand on the back of his neck, he tried to convey something to Gil. He didn't quite understand what the monster wanted from him, but the gesture was familiar to him. The summoner held out his sword to Gil. He didn't attack him anymore. He didn't understand what was going on and why the monster was returning the weapon to him. It all reminded Gil of a cat playing with mice, catching a mouse. The cat is not in a hurry to eat it. He didn't trust the executor, thinking it was a game. Gil concluded that this monster was playing a game with him so that he wouldn't kill his victim at once. The usual killings bored the mastermind. Taking his sword in his hands, the monster immediately grabbed the guy by the throat and lifted him above him. It was a surprise attack he wasn't ready for. But things were not easy for the Supreme. Gil was not going to become an easy prey. He was going to fight back against the assassin. Now Jill was striking the monster with his sword. His whole body was filled with power. He felt like he had a second breath. A thick cloud of smoke rose over the desert. It was visible even from the farthest corners of the desert. It was clear that there was a battle going on. The Supreme reflected Gil's attack and counterattacked him again. Gil was lying on the ground and didn't know where to find his weak point. After this attack, the strength of the sword was already 80%. The monster surpassed Gil's speed by many times. He couldn't keep up with him. Normal attacks are not enough for him. He can't be killed with this. Hovering over the lying guy, the monster grabbed him by his shirt and was lifting him again above his head. The summoner kept playing with him like a mouse. Gil watched him and couldn't figure out the Vertex's next move. He was preparing to fend off the attack. Now Gil was preparing for the worst. Suddenly the monster spoke in human language. He only said one word, but Jill understood it clearly. He said human and was silent again. Jill was shocked that such a creature could talk. He had hoped it could understand human speech. The Supreme began to speak again. He thought the human was as weak as a parrot, that he was superior to it in everything. Gil listened to the sentence to the end and did not tolerate the mockery of himself. He chopped off the hand of the Supreme. He was ready to prove him wrong. After the successful attack, Jill released himself and bounced a safe distance away from the monster. His words made Jill angry. In his anger, Jill told the summoner that he was as ugly as an insect. He had shit in his head, and he wanted to knock it off the summoner's head. The monster looked at his severed arm. He didn't care about it. He was calm. Nothing bothered him. He was the top of the food chain. His arm grew back after a while and was just like before. The apex was curious. The last time he had seen humans was 100 years ago. Gil found the monster quite entertaining as well. He wasn't going to obey him, not even under threat of death. The boy raised his head and smiled at the monster. It had been a long time since he had felt his blood boil. He loved the feeling. Gil realized that his family, his friends, his whole past life was very far away from him, that he needed to abandon himself here and now. He had no right to die in this game. He gained determination. His body was once again covered in a bright light. He was getting stronger. Gil wanted everyone not to give up hope that he would return. He wished they would wait for him. He had to get out of this game alive. A bright, powerful column of light illuminated the desert. It pierced the clouds and went straight up into the sky. What caused it was unclear. The Supreme covered his eyes from the bright flash and saw Jill in that light, who was filled with a power unknown to him. Jill was unstoppable. He felt the influx of new energy flowing through his body. It was a pleasant sensation. When Jill's transformation was complete, the game system gave a notification that he had activated the will to fight. It was a special blessing from the goddess Latona. This gift increased all of Gil's characteristic by 100 points. He was now much stronger than before. Gil brought his sword above his head. He was filled with power that was bursting out. He wanted to deal with the summoner as quickly as possible. Jill's transformation was appreciated. He saw him as a rival who could fight him and who had the power to do so. Before he could speak, Jill was already approaching the summit. His new speed shocked the monster. He was as fast as he was. Jill tried to hit the summoner as fast and hard as he could. His new characteristics gave him hope for a successful attack. He hit him. The blood breezed in different directions. His attack hit the target, and now he was bleeding out. Gil, despite his success, kept his eyes on the monster. He couldn't relax. Even after he bled the monster, he remembered its regeneration. The guy began to chop with the sword of the Vertex. He gave it many blows, which came exactly on target. In one of the attacks, Gil's sword broke into hundreds of pieces. The system notification didn't take long. The weapon's durability was 0. No further use was possible. Gil threw away the hilt of the sword and began to retreat from the monster. There was nothing to attack with, and he did not want to get into the clutches of the monster. He retreated. Jill retreated, just so that he could gather all his strength in a fist. He was again near the Vertex and gave him a powerful blow with his fist, right on the face of the monster. The force of the blow was incredible. The Vertex flew away as if it had never existed, and now it was forced to defend itself against Gil's attacks. Jill was determined to change the perception of the human race that the monster was convinced of. Rushing to the place where the apex had fallen, when the dust cleared, Jill found that the apex was not there. It had disappeared. But the speed of the apex was incredible. He had deliberately let himself be damaged to test Gil's strength. He was already behind the guy. His attacks didn't kill the monster. Realizing that he had the Vertex behind him, Gil felt that he was trapped. The Vertex attacked the guy while he was trying to understand how he managed to come to his senses so quickly. Jill tried to get up again and again to continue the fight. The Vertex approached him and said what he had said earlier, that the man was like a parasite to him. With sadness on his face, it was clear that he could not be defeated. Even after improving all the characteristics, it was not enough. Suddenly, the summoner rose above the sitting Gil, high into the sky. The boy was at his feet. The monster had the ability to fly, which was even more of a problem. The summoner wanted to end the fight. He had had enough of his victim. He raised his hand. In the palm of his hand was a sphere of energy. The monster used his technique and summoned an even more terrifying monster that should put an end to Gil. Such power the guy had never seen in his life. The Supreme was sure that now he would massacre Gil. He stretched out his hand and was already saying goodbye to the guy. He aimed all his power at Gil, who still couldn't get away from the last attack. The monster was sure that he wouldn't miss. Gil raised his head and saw that the monster had directed an attack at him. He had to do something about it or he would die. There was a huge rumble across the desert. The attack reached the earth and hit Gil. It was not clear if he had time to get back. The attack hit Gil's body with thousands of needles. It was one of the most powerful attacks of the Supreme. There was little chance to survive. Gil fell to the ground. He had no strength at all. The life was slowly fading in him, but he still wanted to say something. Bleeding, he couldn't believe that he would die in this game at the hands of the mastermind. He wasn't ready for it. After a while, a system notification appeared. Gil's health points are 0. The player is dead. Not realizing what was happening, he heard the voice of a girl who was glad that he came to his senses. Gil woke up and came to himself and saw in front of him a beautiful girl who was holding a laundry basin. Gil did not understand what was happening. The girl turned around and hurried to the door. She shouted to her grandfather that the guy woke up. Suddenly, Gil remembered that he was dead, but now he was fine. He had a lot of questions about what it was all about. Gil continued to sit on the bed trying to understand something. His heart was pounding in his chest at an incredible speed. He was excited. He exhaled deeply. He was trying to calm down. He realized that he had dreamed the whole thing. Gil couldn't tell if he was alive or if it was all an illusion. He was tormented by this question. Gil looked out the window. He thought that he had managed to get out of the game. He liked the feeling of freedom. He was glad. But it was too early to rejoice. He had to find out who this girl was, how he had gotten here, how he had escaped death. From the window of his room, Gil saw the beautiful nature, the bright sun shining through the mountains. He could not understand what this place was. Gil was still not free. He went into the settings of the game and wanted to see his characteristics. He was trying to figure out what was going on. With a disgruntled face, Gil stated that he was still trapped in the game, and he had yet to get out. It was depressing him. He remembered how, that night, the summoner had definitely defeated him. The guy felt that he was dead, but how he was alive, he wondered. He woke up in an unknown place, completely unharmed, and he had to solve the mystery. There were no marks on his body from the battle. He thought more and more about what had happened to him. The door to the room where Gil was creaked open, and someone appeared on the doorstep, distracting him from his thoughts. A very beautiful, red-haired young girl came into the room. She brought Gil some things for him to change. The girl repeated the phrase she had told him the first time they met. Gil thought that maybe it wasn't the same girl. He was back on the bed, sitting in the same position, and everything was the same as the first time they met, but it looked strange. Gil said hello to the stunning stranger and told her that he had just woken up, although it seemed to him that it had all happened before. The girl didn't answer anything. She turned around and headed for the exit, calling her grandfather and telling him that the guy was awake. Gil didn't understand what was happening, why everything was happening again. He thought for a moment that he was in a village of fools. At that time, a man was working in the rice field. He was carefully, leisurely. He walked bed by bed. He did not think about anything else. He was a man with long gray hair. His whole body was covered with scars. It was obvious that he had spent a lot of time fighting. He did not hear what his granddaughter shouted to him. He asked her to repeat the words again, but he listened to her carefully. Between the young people, at that time had already started a dialogue. He told her his story, but because of the screams of the grandfather, the girl had to ask Gil again. At the moment when Gil was telling his story, the grandfather joined them. Gil said that all his chest was slashed. He asked them how he was in this place. The girl pointed to the grandfather and explained to Gil how he ended up in this place. His grandfather found him when he was hunting. The grandfather, whose name was Ube, was smoking his pipe and remembering that day. Gil was on the brink of death when Ube found him. Grandpa Ubby informed Gil that he had no idea about any game or pledge village. The lad was very surprised. He assured Gil that they were not gamblers in anything, but ordinary people who planted rice and did household chores. Gil was astonished. He knew it was impossible and that he was in the game. He took it all for a system error. He sat for a long time thinking how he could convince them that he was telling the truth and that everything around him was a game. He came up with an idea. Gil turned to the system and called up his characterization window. This would have to convince them to believe him. Grandpa Ubby and his granddaughter looked at him and didn't understand what he was trying to tell them. They were tense with incomprehension. Gil began to explain to them how the taskbar worked. He assured them that he had a map. He showed them everything he knew. While Gil was waving his arms around, the granddaughter and grandfather thought he had hurt his head. They couldn't see anything Gil was talking about. The guy thought the room wasn't getting a signal. The id with his beloved's name on it wasn't searching. He realized he was cut off from the outside world and there was nothing he could do about it. He was angry again. He was doing his best to leave the game, but he didn't know how to do it. No ideas came to his mind. Gil started hitting the taskbar out of sheer frustration. He couldn't be in the game anymore. He wanted to go back home. He wondered if anyone had managed to leave the game, what they had done for it. He hoped their experience would help him. After listening carefully to Gil, his grandfather turned around and was about to leave. Pulling the tube out of his mouth, he informed him that no one had ever managed to leave the game. In anger, Gil started to question the old man, how he could know that it was impossible to leave the game, how they were here. He needed information. The girl, after a little thought, decided to tell him their story. A few years ago, they killed a dragon on the mainland, and at that moment, they were struck by a lightning strike. After the strike, they found themselves in this word place. The grandfather knew that they were in the desert. Anything and anyone could be here. You can get out by getting to the temple of the Kaibri. The girl told Jill amazing things. She told him the legend that the desert had no end. It was immense. She wanted to warn Gil that countless people had gone in search of the temple, but none of them had returned. The people who were in the game gradually abandoned the idea of searching for the temple. They did not want to die and left to live in the game. Gil listened to them carefully, but he didn't want to stay living here. He wanted to go back to his world where he was happy. Ubby put his hand on Jill's shoulder and told him that every year new people appeared, but no one had ever left. Leaving the room, Ubbe gave the young man some advice. He advised him to gradually come to terms with this reality, adding that later his granddaughter would show him the town. Ubby and Sally, that was the girl's name, left Gil alone with his thoughts. He was sure he was still in the game. He had seen such plots often in the real world. An unexpected notification from the system distracted Gil from his thoughts. He didn't immediately realize what the system wanted from him. He had a new task. When he opened the notification, he saw that he was waiting for Ul's payback for the early death of Kaibri. He didn't know what it meant, but he had no options. He just had to accept the task. Gil read the terms of the assignment. He had to find and break the seal that restrained the god of Kaibri. It was the seal that saved Gil from the summoner. The guy was furious. The conditions that considered the task completed were unrealistic. He was required to find the temple, kill the monster Nabris, and free the Kaibri. But the reward for completing this task calmed Gil down. He had a chance to free himself. The reward was a key that would help him leave the desert. Gil left the room outside and came to Sally, who was sitting on the grass. He told her about the task and that he didn't know how much time he needed to do it. The guy talked to the girl, turned around, and went to think about his new assignment. He knew that it would be very difficult to fulfill it. Leaving, Jill thought that he had already died once, and it didn't matter what was ahead of him. He went on a search. Jill came to a field where there was no one. The tall green grass was developing in the warm wind. The sun was warming the ground. The guy wanted to be alone with his thoughts. He lay down on the grass in the shade so that the sun would not blind him. He opened his features and started thinking. He had a goal, and he would try to reach it. Gil was going over the terms of the task in his head. He was putting everything in order. He wanted to know where to start and what could help him accomplish the task. He was lying down and setting himself up for the task. He had one thought in his head, that when the time came, he had to find a way to get out of the game. The guy was in no hurry. He was enjoying the warm day. He needed to distract himself from negative thoughts, but from far away he heard someone calling his name. Gil got up from the grass to see who was looking for him. He saw Sally running towards him. Apparently, she wanted to talk to him again. The girl came running to him and asked him a few questions. She couldn't understand why he had run away to this place. She had spent half a day looking for him. Gil apologized to her for spending so much time looking for him. He had nothing to do and wanted to go for a walk. The boy got up, went to the edge of the slope, and pointing his finger asked if he understood correctly whether the desert was a Rark desert or not. The girl, confused, gave him an ambiguous answer. It looked as if she wanted to tell him something, or if she was not telling him something. Sally got up and walked over to Gil. "The place where we are is surrounded by desert on all sides," the girl said, looking at him. Then the girl raised her hand and pointed to some place. Gil turned around and looked carefully in the distance where Sally had pointed. He confessed to the girl that he didn't know how long it would take to find the temple. Sally was surprised that he wanted to search for it. Determined, Gil told her that he had to get out of here. He had no options. He didn't want to stay here. When Gil turned around and started to leave, the girl suddenly told him that there was no temple and that if he left, he would die. Gil heard her words but did not pay them any attention. His main goal was to get out of the game, no matter what it cost. He wasn't afraid. He had already died once, and he wasn't afraid of death anymore. He didn't care what he had to overcome to find it. Gil invited Sally to walk with him to town. He liked talking to her ear, and on the way to town he could learn something else that would be useful to him for the mission. They walked towards the city. They talked about everything they wanted to talk about. During the walk, Gil forgot that they were in the game. The girl walked beside him and did not dare to ask Gil a question that bothered her. She wanted to know if he really wanted to search for the temple. Sally asked him a little shyly about the temple, to which she received an immediate, firm yes. She warned Gil that there were many different monsters in the desert, and even her grandfather didn't dare to hunt them. Gil was pleased that Sally was worried about him, but he hurried to reassure her that he thought he had amazing abilities. As they approached the town, they saw something begin to appear in front of them. They had never seen anything like it before. They waited to see what would happen next. Gil saw a silhouette that came out of a purple cloud of smoke. It was coming straight at him. He had to do something. A loud explosion raised more smoke in the sky, because of which there was nothing to see. No one understood what was happening. Who was attacking them? There was a big hole in the middle of the road, from which smoke was still coming and fire was visible. Someone had deliberately blown up the road. They were met by 3 guys who appeared and made all these explosions. It was clear that there would be a fight. The main one of them was very glad that the game had fallen to them, that they had been successful in their hunt, and now it was up to them to take what was theirs. Jill, a little groggy from the smoke and dust, could not understand what was going on and why these 3 were attacking them, what they wanted. Right in front of Gil appeared Sally, who successfully fended off the first attack on them. The guy was shocked at the girl's abilities. The main villain was surprised that she was able to shield herself from his strike. She used the fire dungeon to defend herself. They had met before and knew each other. It looked like Sally had been wanted by these bandits for a long time. The girl also saw a familiar face. He was calm and kept his guard up. The main one turned out to be a guy named Boban. The fire in Sally's hand was gradually dying out. She no longer needed to fend off attacks. Gil was distracted. He didn't understand what was going on and why they were attacking them. Sally looked at the trio carefully. She had forgotten to tell Gil that only bandit hunters were scarier than the monsters in the game. She explained to the boy that they don't hunt in the wilderness to avoid death. Instead, they simply rob other people. Boban was amused by Sally's words. He made his living by killing ordinary people. He stood there laughing for a long time. 2 swords appeared in Boban's hands. They looked very intimidating. He wanted to finish them both off and make some more money. Gil had never seen such abilities before. He was curious what they were and how to defend himself against their attacks. Boban pointed his sword at Sally. He reminded her that last time she had managed to escape into the desert, but now things would be different. Sally was ready for battle. She began to show off her power. She would make them think twice before attacking her. Before attacking, the girl turned around and asked Gil to go home and look for Grandpa Ubi. She didn't need any help here. She was sure she could beat them. Boban was a confident guy. He knew that Sally's attacks wouldn't do him any harm. He offered to follow Sally. He gave her a condition, and if she fulfilled it, he would let Jill go and not touch him, but Jill wasn't going to run away from them. At this time, Grandpa Ubi was strolling leisurely under the moonlight and smoking his pipe. He looked thoughtful. The weather was gradually worsening. Gray, huge clouds were coming, darkness was engulfing the city, and the first thunderstorm had struck. Grandpa stopped for not far from the house. He wanted to assess the situation around. He had to prepare for bad weather. He looked at the sky and realized that a thunderstorm was coming. It worried him. Now he was thinking only about it. He sped up his steps and headed for his house. It was not safe to stay outside. It was very serious. Walking up to the house, the old man thought that Sally's granddaughter, looking at how long it had been, should have gotten home by now. Sally and Jill were still trying to get away from Boban, who wouldn't let them go without bringing the old man to help them. Boban kept saying that Sally's spells would not work against an opponent like him, so he called her back to him. His condition was simple. Sally must go with them, then he would not touch Gil. These words did not please Gil. Boban tried again to tell them something, but the girl would not listen to him any longer and shouted sharply that he would not even dream of it. Then he looked at them. Boban turned to the girl and asked her not to blame him for being too cavalier with them. Sally realized that a fight was about to break out. She didn't turn around and told Gil to run away from there. She could figure out how to hold them off. Gil's answer was short and clear, but at the same time firm and decisive. He refused to run away, leaving her alone with them. His answer shocked her. She couldn't understand why he answered her like that. She looked at him and tried to find an answer. He saw that the girl did not understand his answer. Gil explained to her that he did not know the word escape, and it was not about him. He was ready to stand up for her, even though they knew each other only a little. Jill was determined. He could not leave his comrade in distress, and at the expense of running away himself, it was low for him. Boban didn't wait any longer and listened to their conversation. He decided to attack Gil. He wanted to catch him off guard. He grabbed Gil by the head, and with all his might he pinned him against a nearby tree. He was quick and precise in his attack. Sally was scared for Gil. She didn't expect Boban to attack him first. She hadn't seen what he was capable of. Boban was angry. He thought Gil was a lowlife, who thought too much of himself. He didn't believe his stories. He thought he was a liar. He told Gil that in this world it was not words but power that mattered. Boban thought he was very strong compared to Gil. Gil got tired of Boban's chattering. He grabbed him by the hand he used to hold his head. Boban was surprised to be rebuffed. The guy took Boban's hand off his head and asked him the same question he had heard from Boban earlier. Did the thug really think he was stronger than Gil? Gil held the bandit tightly. The guy remained calm. Whether a sneak attack was an indication of the bandit's skill, Gil couldn't understand. Holding one of Boban's hands securely, Gil gave him his blow. It was accurate and strong. Everyone watching them was surprised. The bandit was thrown back a couple of meters by Gil's attack. He fell, but it wasn't easy for him to stop. He could barely stand on his feet. The pain in Boban's arm was intense. He thought it was broken. This was a problem for him and his subsequent attacks. He couldn't believe the boy had the strength to twist his wrist. He needed to strategize his attacks. Gil looked at Boban and tried to study him. He noted his speed. Gil had added all his agility points, but he still didn't have time to react to his attack. Sally ran up to Gil to see if he was injured. The boy told her that he was perfectly fine and the bandit had done no damage to him. The girl made sure Gil was okay and turned to Boban to see what he wanted from them. Boban, still trying to heal his arm, it was giving him discomfort. He told her that he had come here for her to be his girlfriend. Sally was not happy with that option. She had no feelings for him. She asked him to leave his attempts to win her over. Gil looked at Sally. He wanted to know if this was all happening for her to date him. The girl nodded her head positively. Boban saw them talking and thought they were dating. Did she reject him because of Gil? It was unbelievable to him. Sally was at a loss for words. What was he talking about? She shouted. They were just friends. Gil was standing aside, and he was pleased that Sally considered him a friend. Boban didn't believe her. A smirk appeared on his face. It was probably just her excuse not to go out with him, he was sure of it. The thought made the bandit angry. He wanted to fight Gil like men. Sally should not interfere in their duel. Before he attacked Jill, he made a condition. If Jill could overpower him, Boban would once and for all get away from the girl. After the bandit said the condition, a system notification appeared with a new side quest for Jill. He needed to give an answer. But before Jill could make a decision, a new notification popped up. It said that the reward would be a lost map of Latona. It was a chance for Jill to find the lost temple. Gil scrutinized the notification. He was excited about the reward. Finally, he had a real chance to get out of the game. The boy looked at the bandit and agreed to his condition. He knew he had to win whatever it took. Deal, said Boban, and a strange sword appeared in his hand. It was not like any sword Jill had ever seen before. Standing behind their leader, the two bandits noted that their bro was getting serious and that he was jealous of Sally and the stranger. The tension was rising rapidly. Sally had warned Gil that he was facing the best shadow swordsman in their town, and she was sure that Gil couldn't beat him. Gil didn't know what shadow swordsman meant. He was a little confused by the word, but what he was most interested in was how strong he was. Sally knew all about Boban. Not only was he able to use the power of the dark shadow, but he also had great speed. She also told him that his attack power was as strong as his other stats. The shadow that enveloped his blades gave them devastating power, making him a strong opponent. Gil stepped forward to start the battle with Boban. The girl tried to talk him out of it. She didn't want Gil to die. The boy walked confidently. He didn't listen to what Sally was shouting at him. He had died once before. Now there was no fear of death in him. He had only one wish, to get out of the game, and for that he would destroy everything in his way. The battle began. They both tried to damage each other, but their speed allowed them to dodge the dangerous attacks. Gil looked at the girl and spoke words she didn't expect to hear. He would not back down and would fight as long as it took for his freedom. With a smile on his face, Gil asked the girl to calm down and not to worry. The fight was not avoidable, but after his victory, they would be able to get out together. Sally's eyes were filled with surprise at what Gil had said. Did he really want them to get out together? The question confused her. Jill couldn't understand why things had turned out so badly. Not knowing the answer to that question made Jill sad. But after defeating Boban, everything would be fine again. Jill was sure he needed this card that was given for the victory. Shadow Swordsman was really fast. In an instant, he could be behind Gil's back and successfully attack him. Gil felt that the bandit was behind his back, and he wanted to counterattack him with a spinning attack. But the guy's attack was too slow for the shadowy swordsman. He saw Gil's foot go past his chin. This amused the bandit. Boban drew his sword and clenched it tightly in his hand. Behind him, it looked like two more bandits like himself were standing behind him. They were his shadow clones. Sally stood and watched them fight. She wanted it to be over quickly. She didn't like fighting, and she didn't like watching fights anymore. Suddenly, Boban turns to her. He was laughing with Gil. He thought that was all he was capable of. He didn't understand why she could like Gil. Jill didn't pay attention to Boban's taunts. He was thinking about his opponent. It was strange that he kept defending himself from his attacks. but he didn't attack back. He seemed to be up to something. Sally approached Gil and wanted him to leave the battlefield and find Grandpa Ubi. She would go with Boban. She knew Grandpa would free her. He could handle the bandit. At the offer to leave, Gil gave an emphatic refusal. There was no way he would leave the battlefield. It was not acceptable to him. He asked the girl to calm down. He could not withdraw from the fight. It was too late. He needed only victory. It would allow them to get out of this game. When she heard what Gil had told her, she was shocked. How their fight would get them out, she wondered. She didn't know what the reward was for defeating Boban. Sally couldn't understand what Gil was talking about. She thought he was going crazy. He hadn't told her about the reward that he would have had in his hands if he had won. Jill explained to her that everything made no sense the moment he got into the game. He was stuck here with no way out. He was dead, and then found himself among the living. He told Sally about the reward. He might have thought it was random at first, but the guy was sure that someone was in control. He needed to find out who was behind it. The fight stopped. No one was in a hurry to attack. Gil stood and thought how he could strike a decisive blow and not get trapped, but suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by a bandit who wanted something from him. Boban thrust his blades into the ground. It looked like he wanted to talk to Gil, or that he just wanted to rest and distract Gil from the fight. The bandit continued to taunt Jill. He was confident and could not lose. He thought that Jill was scared of him, but he could not back down. But Jill decided to play a joke on Boban. He compared him to a grasshopper that runs away from him when Jill attacks him. A verbal fight ensued. They tried to throw each other off balance, but there was no result. Boban was bored with the fight. Smiling sinisterly, he noticed that Gil had no weapons. Even though Boban was the bandit, he wanted a fair fight. Because the girl he was in love with was at stake, he wanted to impress her. He threw one of his swords at Gil. It was fair, Boban thought. He didn't see the guy as a rival anyway. He thought he was the best swordsman, so he was going to lose. With a deft movement, Jill caught the sword. Now the chances of victory increased for him. With the sword, Jill felt even more confident than before. The fight was getting more and more interesting. Boban didn't want Sully and his charges to think that his victory was unfair. It humiliated him. He kept smiling wickedly. Boban's underlings, who were standing behind him, noticed the seriousness of their boss's intentions. They did not doubt his victory. They admired the nobility of their leader. Sally was surprised by Boban's action. She had never seen him act honorably before. It came as a complete surprise to her. Gil stood and taunted the thug. He wanted to seem like a decent guy, but Gil still remembered his slap from the sneak attack, so he was always on guard. There was already more of a verbal altercation going on between them, as if they were two teenagers. Boban denied his foul attack. He was acting emotional at that moment. Gil was sick of words. He wanted a real fight. Getting into a fighting stance, before the attack, Jill said that if he was telling the truth, then it would be a fair fight between them. Now Gil was serious. He had to defeat him and get the coveted card. Boban couldn't wait to show Jill the true power of the shadow. He raised his sword and prepared to attack. Jill kept his eyes on the bandit so that he wouldn't be caught in a slash like the first attack. This time, he could take real damage. The boy was the first to attack Boban, who was standing still and waiting for the attack. He didn't try to move away or run away. He just stood there. Boban smiled. The prey was coming at him, he thought. He just needed to successfully fight it and he would be done. The bandit nearly hit Jill with his sword, who managed to avoid the attack at the last moment. A strange shadow was coming from the blade, Jill noticed. Gil was frozen in place by what he saw. He was facing a serious opponent that Gil hadn't had time to study. He didn't know what Boban was capable of. Boban raised his sword to attack Jill. The smile was still on his face. He was enjoying the game he had started. Jill reacted in time and blocked his opponent's blade with his sword above his head, sparks flying from the clash of the two swords. The guy was holding back the bandit's onslaught. Swinging his sword, he tried to keep his eyes on his opponent to avoid cancerous mistakes. He couldn't be killed. But Sally's voice distracted Gil from the enemy. She was trying to warn him that he was being attacked from behind, and he needed to defend himself. Jill saw the attacker, and now there were two of them. But the question was simple. Where had the other one come from and who was he? Gil pushed Boban away. He had to dodge the second attacker. He could have easily killed him if Sally hadn't shouted at him in time. Jill turned around and stopped the unknown assailant. The blade that hit him in the back was bigger than the one Boban had given him. His reaction didn't fail him. The unknown assailant just scattered in the wind. He disappeared like a shadow. Jill didn't understand what was happening, how it was possible. He couldn't believe what was happening. Gil began to realize that he had made a mistake, that he had fallen into the trap Boban had set for him, but when he had managed to pull it off was a mystery to him. Sally was frightened for Gil. She saw that he had plucked and fallen into one of Boban's traps. He was in danger. She could not interfere in the fight. Boban's sword reached its target. His attack damaged Jill. The sword strike caused blood to rush in different directions. Jill needed treatment. Jill laughed at the fact that he was so easily trapped. The bandit had taken down 300 health. He still had 700 health left. If his health reached the 300 mark, he would automatically lose. Drops of blood were still falling to the ground from Boban's sword. He once again offered a surrender to Gil, who was in no hurry to get up. He was catching his breath. The bandit was sure of himself. He told Gil that he had no chance of defeating him, that he would only lose ignominiously. Gil knew he couldn't give up. He couldn't let go of this chance to free himself. He was already on his feet. He was badly wounded. The system offered him to take advantage of the treatment. He looked at the notice and couldn't figure out how best to proceed. After all, the battle wasn't over and he might still need this treatment. After thinking carefully, he agreed to use the treatment. The wound was starting to hurt more and was causing discomfort in his attacks. The system quickly applied a level 1 treatment that gave Gil 100 points to his health. His wound healed. He was almost restored. Standing behind Boban, the subordinates realized that Gil was a support. It was hilarious for them to see a normal support fighting a shadow swordsman. Boban turned his back on Gil and urged him to leave Sully and walk away. He didn't think it was worthy of a fight with an awakened support. Bandit started to walk away, but Gil shouted words that stopped him. Gil teased him that he was afraid of losing in Sully's presence. Gil's words made Boban furious. He had never been so angry before. No one dared to doubt his courage. Gil got into a fighting stance and suggested that they talk less and resume their fight. He had enough strength to continue. The shadow clone began to emerge from Boban's body again. It no longer wanted to be ceremonious with Gil. The only thing it wanted was for him to see the true power of the shadow swordsman. There were already 2 shadow clones behind him. He was calm and waited until the clones were completely finished. This was one of the swordsman's abilities. Their speed was incredible. They were faster than Boban himself. One of them was already behind Gil's back and ready to attack him. Boban noted that Gil was lucky to escape, but a big one like that wouldn't happen again. He wouldn't give him another chance to escape. Attacking. The bandit bled again. No one doubted that the battle was already serious. This time it was more damage. Gil stood and watched as Boban split in 3. Now he had to defend himself against 3 fast and dangerous bandits. Boban was kind enough to explain to Gil that shadow swordsmen use the cloning ability in combat, which increased the chances of victory. Gil began to strategize on how to win. He remembered his first attack where a clone was used. He realized that they were connected and could switch places at any moment. It was a difficult class of opponent for the guy. It would not be easy for him to defeat him with such abilities, but he did not give up. Soon, the bandit was tired of showing compassion to the worthless support. He would be ruthless and merciless. Crossing his arms and remaining calm, the bandit turned to Gil. If he wanted to see his true strength, he would have that chance before he died. Gil raised his sword and was fully geared up for the fight. He was looking forward to it. He didn't wait for this bandit to attack. This time he ran at him first, hoping to get even with him for the trouble he had caused him. Boban stood still, unmoved, unconcerned that Gil was running at him. A very arrogant fellow, the bandit thought at that moment. He had left it to his 2 clones to deal with Gil, and he thought that was enough for him. The clone on the bandit's right began to follow his orders and moved at breakneck speed to counterattack Gil before he could strike his master. Gil gripped his sword tightly with both hands. He saw the target coming at him. He needed to stop in order not to be trapped again. The shadow clone struck with his blade but failed to reach his target. Gil fended off his attack. His sword skills were no worse than Boban's either. The bandit stood aside and controlled the clone like a puppet. He directed it for new attacks. He was looking for a weak point in Gil's defense. But the guy tried his best to make as little contact with the clones as possible. He wanted to appear invulnerable, to be attacked by the real Boban. While fending off the attacks, Gil forced the real bandit to take part in the fight. While attacking the clone, Boban attacked behind Gil's back, but Gil managed to dodge. The guy noted the bandit's strength. It was hard for him to resist even the clone's attacks, even though he hadn't been attacked by a real bandit yet. Boban stood and enjoyed it. He liked to see the fight between the clones and Gil. The guy was attacked by only 1 clone, and there were 2 of them, and both of them were strong. The second clone joined the battle while Gil was trying to crush the first one. He already had the second one behind him. The situation was repeating itself. He managed to dodge last time, but this time it looked like he wouldn't be able to avoid the attack. The sharp sword of the shadow clone was already approaching Gil from behind. He felt it. He needed to put up a defense, but he didn't know how to do it. It seemed that the clone had caught up with the guy. Blood flowed on the ground again. The damage was done. It was unclear whether the clone had finished him off or the guy had managed to dodge. The sword slowly fell to the ground. It seemed that the battle was over and Gil had lost the fight. Boban was happy with this scenario. Both Sally and the 2 like-minded men were stunned. They didn't know how to react to this. There was genuine surprise on their faces. Boban couldn't understand how it was possible Gil was still able to dodge and avoid death. The bandit seemed to be losing confidence in his abilities. He was enveloped in anger. He didn't understand what was going on, how he managed to dodge his attacks all the time. Gil, with an ironic laugh, bounced back from the attack. This time he got away, but he almost lost his life. As soon as Gil stopped, a few system notifications popped up. He was given some nice bonuses for the maneuver he performed while dodging the attack. He stood studying his new bonuses. He had been gifted the lightning strike skill. He could only use it again after 5 seconds. Had the skill not appeared earlier, he would have been killed already. Gil stood filled with new skills. He became even stronger. Now he only needed to find the real one among the three, and he could finish the fight. The shadow clone killed by the boy recovered and stood next to Boban, who looked at Gil, laughing hysterically. Boban was laughing hysterically, amused by the fact that he not only managed to dodge, but also managed to hit the clone, thinking it had dealt with him. For Boban, this fight had been fun, but now he decided to get real and not to give in to Gil. He ordered the clone back. As soon as the bandit finished his speech, he immediately launched a new, serious attack on Gil, who was not ready for it. Boban felt that by sympathizing with his opponent, he was holding himself back and not attacking properly. He admitted that he had underestimated Gil. He shouted threateningly that the games were over and warned Gil not to blink because the speed of the attack would be unbelievable. Boban, along with his shadow clones, prepared to attack Gil. They were as one. Their movements were synchronized. Gil was already ready to attack. His face looked calm and confident. He wanted to test his new skills in battle. The trio now had no swords in their hands. They were using a new kind of weapon, while Gil didn't even have a sword. He didn't know what to use to defend himself from the attacks. Boban set up for his best attack that was going to lead him to victory. This was his final attack. This attack was dangerous and deadly. Gil should not be exposed to it. It would be the end of him. The attack was called Wasteland Strike, the strongest attack in Boban's arsenal. A ring of shadows formed around Gil. He was surrounded and could not get out of the ring. He had never seen an attack like this before. Suddenly, an arrow in the form of a sharp lightning bolt shot out of the ring and flew straight at Gil's head. Gil's dexterity worked perfectly, and he was able to dodge the arrow coming at him, almost calmly. But there was more than one arrow. They kept trying to hit Gil, and more of them were coming. Gil twisted around, dodging them as best he could. One shot was almost accurate. It barely grazed Gil's shoulder, but it hit him hard and wounded his arm. The attacks did not slow down, but only increased. More and more arrows were being fired into the narrow, enclosed ring, and it was dangerous for Gil to be inside. Boban stood outside the ring and watched what was happening. At one moment, he ordered the clone to get away from him. He was preparing another surprise for Gil. Gil tried to jump out of the ring, and at that moment, a notification appeared that he had already lost 30% of his health. He needed to heal his wounds urgently. Without a weapon, he could only dodge. But Boban surprised Gil again with his cunning. The moment Gil jumped above the ring, he was already under attack from above by Boban, controlling his shadow. Boban fatally hit Gil. Gil didn't know what to do, how to defend himself without a weapon, how to stop taking damage. Boban could already see Gil starting to stagger from the wound. Death had already crept up on him completely unnoticed by him. The bandit was defeating Gil. Gil was enveloped by a shadow, and thousands of needles began to wound the defenseless guy, causing him mortal damage. Finally, Boban's plan worked and Gil was almost defeated, proving that he was the best shadow swordsman in town. Boban watched Gil take the lethal damage. He was incredibly happy. He promised that he would find a great place for him in the cemetery. But the bandit's happy moment was suddenly interrupted. Someone was approaching the place of battle. Boban tensed up and looked carefully into the distance. A gray hair, with a hat behind his back, flashed past the bandit. He was so fast that no one could see his face. From outside the city, there was a powerful explosion that could be heard everywhere. Gray clouds covered the whole sky. Something terrible was coming to the city. Sally was worried again and didn't understand what was happening, who was approaching them, how to help Gil. Two of Boban's servants stood silently with their mouths open. Boban turned around at the loud clap. He saw Grandpa Ube, centimeters away from him, stop Gil's attack, who was mad with anger. Grandpa saved Boban. Grandpa didn't want the fight to continue. He asked Gil to calm down. There were more important things to do right now. He looked at them all carefully. He was in time, or one of them would have been dead. He stood pensively but said nothing. There were voices coming from the open door in the house. It was raining outside, and in the room, Sally was asking Gil to stop fidgeting. It was bothering her. Gil was lying on this bed. Sally was sitting beside him. She was dressing Gil's numerous wounds, but the pain made him twitch reflexively, which slowed down the girl's robot. In the forest, among the trees, something was going on. It was not possible to take away what exactly was there. The noise of rain and the sound of thunder came more and more often to the people of the city. Wet in the heavy rain, wounded, stood Gil and nervously practiced. He tried to discharge the accumulated anger. He was hitting a nearby tree with all his might, not paying attention to his wounds, but he was distracted by an old man who came up to him. Grandpa Ubby asked Gil to stop. It was obvious that he wanted to talk to him, but he continued to beat the tree and did not pay attention to the old man. Sally came running after Grandpa. She wanted to make sure Gil was okay, but the guy was very angry. Jill looked at them and stopped throwing his anger into the tree. He told the girl that he was fine. He tried to calm her down. Grandpa Ubby, not paying attention to Boban, approached his granddaughter and Gil. They had to get out of there. There was a storm coming, which worried the grandfather. Jill didn't understand why the old man was so scared of the usual thunderstorm. The bandit behind him was laughing again. Sally, on the other hand, knew the danger of the storm. Boban continued to mock them. He couldn't stop. It was hilarious to him that Grandpa Ubby had come for them. But his laughter was abruptly replaced by anger on Boban's face. He threatened the old man that he would not be able to take them away without a fight. He could not let that happen. After the bandit's threats, the old man stopped abruptly. He was not scared. He wanted to clarify something to Boban, to warn him. Now the grandfather was threatening Boban. He warned him that if he tried to stop them, the old man stopped talking. He didn't want to say what was waiting for him. Boban interrupted the old man with a serious look on his face and told him that if he wanted to leave him, the old man's days would be numbered. He still believed in his own strength. Gil did not tolerate Boban's taunts and threats. He thought the bandit was bluffing, saying that he would win. But the bandit still stood his ground. He didn't believe that he could be killed by the newly minted support, even with his agility. Boban shouted to the old man, psyching himself up, that if he hadn't gotten involved in their fight now, Gil would have been dead long ago. While the bandit was trying to instill fear in everyone, a system notification appeared in front of Gil, stating that he had successfully completed the task of defeating Boban's shadowy thug. Gil was confused. He didn't know why the system gave him the victory since he hadn't killed the thug. Grandpa Ubby was quick to remind them that the storm was coming, and it was time to get to safety. The thug's underlings hurriedly reassured their boss that if they got caught in the storm, they could die here. Boban didn't want him to stop the fight. Even though the deadly storm was coming at them, he didn't care. He was eager to kill Gil. Both wards restrained Boban. He tried to break free and fight with Gil again, but the guy listened to the old man and was about to leave. Jill turned around and saw that Boban was being restrained by his wards. Jill was quite surprised at his behavior and eagerness to fight. Sally noticed that Jill had stopped and was not following them. She called out to him, warning him that the storm was near and he had to leave immediately. When Sally returned home, she found a number of wounds on Gil's body that had been left by the thug during their fight. She began to treat them. She carefully treated and bandaged Jill's wounds. The process would have gone faster, but Jill kept twitching and getting in her way. She asked for patience. She was finishing. Jill accidentally caught Sally's foot, which hurt a little. She told him she couldn't put ointment on him because of his constant twitching. He apologized and lay still on the bed. During the reversal, Jill was upset that he had caused trouble for her and her grandfather again. Sally said, "What's done is done. No need to worry." She noted that she hadn't expected him to be so strong. Gil was lying on the bed and analyzed the outcome of the fight. This time he had gained experience, but his level was the same. His wounds needed to heal. He had to figure out the mechanics of raising his level. He thought about it and decided to talk to the girl. It seemed to him that she and her grandfather already knew Boban, so he asked Jill. Sally was uncomfortable with the question. She told Jill that she and he had been together since they were kids. She thought they were like brother and sister, nothing more. The girl fixed her beautiful red hair and happily told Gil that she had finished treating his wounds. She got up and was ready to leave, but Gil got up and thanked her for her help. A little pained, the girl replied to him that she should be the one thanking him for what he had done for her. Gil was pleased that the girl was so kind to him. It seemed that a spark had flown between them, that they might like each other. But Sally did not continue the conversation. She had to go to help her grandfather, and she advised Gil to lie down to rest, to which Gil gave a positive answer. The girl left the cabin and went to her grandfather's house, and Jill decided to heed the advice and try to rest after a hard fight. Gil sat near the window. It was raining outside. It calmed him down a little. He looked out the window and remembered that on that unfortunate day it was also raining. The guy suddenly wondered how his mom was. Probably she was going crazy, that he just disappeared from home. He was saddened by such thoughts. He thought that she was crying. She loved her son very much, and it was hard for him to imagine what she was going through. He logged onto the system and decided to look at the map he had been given for defeating Boban. He was already thinking about his future plans. All he had to do was to find the temple, defeat the boss, and then he would be free. Gil was going to go to the search as soon as the rain stopped. He was not going to drag out the process any longer. He wanted to get to the task as soon as possible. He saw the system notifier again. He was informed that he had received the secret key and he needed to confirm it. Gil wondered what the key was, why it was given to him, what it was for. He had too many questions. He acknowledged receipt of the key and then he pointed it at the lock It must have been a portal, Jill thought as he started to open it. He was thrown into what appeared to be a safe or a bank with many chests and treasures. With the key, he could open one of the 6 chests that could hold anything. Gil picked up his cape that he had been walking around in. It seemed that he wanted to go out for a walk, that he was tired of lying idle. But he decided that he couldn't wait any longer and he had to get on the road immediately to find the temple. Jill had no sooner gotten out of bed than his grandfather Ubi came into his room to talk to him. The boy was happy to see him. He didn't think he would want to talk to him after he saved him, but he still came to see him. The old man apologized to him for not coming to see him earlier, but he was busy with a business to save the crops he needed to cover them from the rain that was pouring down like a bucket. Gil accepted the apology, but he thought why the old man came to him? He probably wanted something from him, but the old man just asked how his wounds were, if he was all right. The guy hurried to reassure the grandfather, saying that his wounds were not deep and would heal soon. It would take him a couple of days. Grandpa was glad that he was okay. He decided to confess to Gil. He did not expect that he could defeat Boban, because he is the strongest swordsman in the village. But Gil didn't consider himself a winner. He told the old man that if the thug had taken their fight seriously from the beginning, he wouldn't be alive. The old man poured tobacco into his pipe, telling him that he knew Boban's abilities, but that not only were they important in a fight, but that will was also an important factor. He turned his back to Gil and smoking his pipe told him that he had not won by accident. Gil was puzzled by the words he heard. Gil wondered if he and Sally had been together since childhood, why he had changed so much in a bad way. The old man, letting out tobacco smoke with sadness in his head, quietly said that it was quite a long story. Grandfather left the lodge without telling Gil anything. Without turning around, he told him to come to the mountainside tomorrow when the downpour had passed. Ubi added that if he succeeded in passing all the tests he had prepared, the old man would agree to train him. Grandpa Ubi began his story. He recalled that 10 years ago there was a downpour just like today. That day, he and Sally were in the desert on their errands. As they passed the house where they planned to spend the night, they noticed a strange monster attacking the family that lived there. They arrived too late and no one needed help. The monster had killed everyone and they found the corpses of almost the entire family. Grandpa and Sally were happy to find that their child was still alive. He anxiously held his mother's hand, hoping she was alive. The boy sat over his mother's body, completely helpless. He was unable to defeat the fierce monster that had spotted him and was preparing to kill him. He was still calling out for his mother, even when the monster was ready to snatch the poor boy to finish him off. The monster's unexpected move hit the right target. A bright flash of lightning carried straight through to the monster, saving the boy in the process. The monster received a blow that knocked him back a couple of meters. He didn't see the moment of the attack and didn't have time to defend against it. It was young and fast Grandpa Ubi. He stopped the monster from killing the innocent child who was standing over his dead mom. The monster experienced the power of the grandfather who was young and full of strength. He was going to protect all who were left alive from the monster who was sitting and trying to recover. The grandfather's attack rose up the monster. He was ready to tear everyone to shreds. He was huge and strong. He inspired fear with his mere appearance. But the monster did not attack the young. At that time, grandfather, he hid in the forest with sharp and quick movements and the battle did not take place. Ubi turned around and saw a little boy in tears, still trying to hear his mother's voice, but it was too late. It turned out that the crying boy was the same Boban who had become a thug after experiencing such grief. They helped him to bury all his relatives. He sat by his mother's grave and cried for a long time. He was not evil then. Gil listened attentively to the old man, but still he was tormented by the question, if it was like that, then what did he need from them? Ubi continued with the story from the past. Boban had chosen to find and kill that monster, and the old man had tried to talk him out of it. He explained why he had tried to talk him out of it because there were strong monsters in the desert that were hard to imagine, and even Ubi couldn't kill that monster, and Boban couldn't even kill that monster. The old man added that this was the reason why they had parted ways, and that Gil was interested in the monster, which even Ubi himself considered strong. Ubi hurried to end the conversation. He thought it was time for Gil to rest, but the boy kept thinking about the map and that even with it in his hands, he still had to get to the temple. Gil didn't know how strong the monsters in the desert were, but one could kill him, and his current strength didn't allow him to fight strong opponents. He thought a lot that during the previous battle he had been slain very easily. This was not an option for him. He needed to start training. Grandpa Ubi was already near the exit and was getting ready to put on his jacket when suddenly Gil stopped him. The old man didn't understand what the guy wanted from him. He asked the old man to train him to fight. He wanted to get stronger and find a temple that would allow him to get out of the game. The old man reached for his hat, but from what he heard, he froze in place. He didn't know what to say to Gil. As he left, the old man told Gil, who stood waiting for an answer, to take a good rest and gain strength, for he would need it. But Gil was not satisfied with his grandfather's answer. He was very serious about training. He told his grandfather that he knew a way out. Gil slammed his fist against the door jamb. He realized that he was talking nonsense. That was why he and Boban had split up, and he had just blurted out what was on his mind. The boy stood at the exit of the cabin and waited for the old man's answer. After a little while, Ubi told Gil that he would wait for him after the rain on the mountainside. But he made his condition: if Gil passed his test successfully, he would take him on as an apprentice and train him. Gil was beyond excited. He contentedly told the old man to be calm. The lad was sure he would not let the old man down. Ubi felt that he had renewed hope that they could get out. He remembered that Gil in the battle with Boban had literally burst into flames with terrifying power. Even his best shield couldn't withstand his power. The old man walked on, and more thoughts of Gil came into his mind. He didn't know if it was possible that this youngster would lead them out of the game. Walking into his room, a happy Gil received a new notification from the system. He had a new assignment. He was given daily tasks. He was required to run 10 kilometers with weights, do 3,000 push-ups and 2,000 deadlifts. He stood and studied the new tasks. Gil found it was a hell of a workout, but he needed the new attributes. They would come in handy when he searched for the temple. He couldn't refuse the task. He confidently pressed the button and accepted all the conditions. He had a very difficult training ahead of him. Since the early morning, when the sun began to rise above the city, somewhere in the mountains were heard the sounds of a man working hard. Gil had already started his new tasks, and he started with a 10-kilometer run with a load. He used a huge wooden deck as a load. He was happy with the training. It was helping him to get stronger and stronger. He noticed that the system was trying to take care of him and was helping him with his training as if it wanted him to get out too. Gil had already completed the mandatory 10-kilometer run and started doing the rest of the exercises, but they were still not finished. But Gil didn't give up and kept training. After the workout, Gil thought that it had been a long time since he had struggled to reach his goal, but he was more excited about the challenge than the difficult road ahead. He had no energy left and collapsed to the ground to regain his energy. The system notification informed him that the task had been completed, and he was rewarded with 4 attribute points for his daily training. Gil lay on the green, warm grass. His body was almost exhausted from the training. He had to choose which attribute would be best to supplement. He stood up, and before allocating the points, he looked at his characteristics. He noted his healing and defense abilities, but allocated the points between intelligence and stamina. He thought it would be best for him. When Gil was done with the allocation, a voice distracted his attention. Someone was looking for him. He turned his head to see who was calling him. Sally was running towards him. She had distracted him by saying his name. She looked as beautiful as ever. She was almost there. Jill went up to find out what was wrong, why she was looking for him. Sally explained to Jill that she had brought him breakfast but hadn't found him in his room. Her grandfather had told her where he was now. Sally wondered why Jill was walking around without clothes. She assumed he was training. The boy gave a positive answer, adding that his grandfather Ubi had agreed to teach him how to fight. He took the food and sat down to eat breakfast. Jill had already taken out a bun and was about to eat it when Sally again asked a surprised question. She couldn't believe that his grandfather had taken him on as an apprentice. He had abandoned it long ago. She was excited to hear what she had heard. She was eager to see what abilities he could awaken with training. Gil was surprised by Sally's words. He thought that other skills were unavailable to a simple support. It was a surprise to him. Sally hurried to explain her words to Gil. She said that a support is just a class, and his abilities will be determined based on his predisposition. The girl began to explain him on her own example. Her element was fire, grandfather's was thunder, and Boban has a shadow. All people have their own element. The class only gives direction. The element is determined by itself. Gil understood everything, and it pleased him. He was curious about what he was capable of and what he could awaken with hard training. Grandfather Ubi told Gil that the deity of primordial chaos had once endowed the world with different races. They were called vocations and classes. The only thing they had in common were the elements. He tried to convey to him that they represented not only those that could be seen and touched, but also those that were hidden from human sight, such as light and shadow. The old man told him where he came from. He was from a world that consisted of 5 continents. Bolar was one of the continents for the gathering of people. Its trademark was the boisterous trade and exchange of goods. People from different regions gathered here. He said that Bolar was the center, and a little to the west on the continent of Mokala, there were many volcanoes, the home of dragon riders. To the north was a land called Xanthi. It was forever covered in ice. It was home to giants and various ferocious beasts. It was full of minerals. In the east was the continent of Bergama. It was covered with forests. There lived elves. They possessed magic. There were also huge beasts that carried great danger. The old man continued to tell. The south was home to the dwarves. They were engaged in forging. Their homeland was called Shariktik, in other words, the edge of the earth. Sally, who was sitting under a tree, also told Gil that it was rumored that if one crossed the Great Sea, one could reach the realm of the gods, where he would have endless power. Jill stood and listened attentively to what Sally was saying. She thought it was all a fairy tale, until she found herself in this place, but there was some truth in the stories. The boy sat down near the girl and said that the legend about the temple in the desert could also be real. Gil promised that they would get out of there. Gil's words embarrassed Sally. Gently fixing her beautiful hair, she blushed a little and only nodded her head approvingly. The couple sat and chatted sweetly as the grandfather appeared. Sally jumped up immediately. It was as if they had been caught red-handed. Gil turned calmly towards the old man. Ubi had not expected them to arrive before him. The grandfather didn't understand what his granddaughter was doing here. He asked the girl to clarify the situation. It was obvious that Sally was nervous. She didn't understand what the grandfather meant or what he wanted her to say. The old man raised his head and directed his gaze at Gil, who stood silently to the side and intervened in the conversation between them. Gil stood and prepared himself, and prepared for the first lesson from his grandfather. The old man tilted his head and noticed that the lad had already warmed up before the fight. He stood confidently and prepared for the test. There was no fear in him. He felt more confident than ever. Their lesson began with theory. His grandfather told Gil how the world began, who its inhabitants were, who was endowed with what, and what they all had in common. Gil stood in front of the old man and tried not to miss anything. Every detail was important to him. He needed to be trained as best as possible to be ready for anything. Grandpa Ubby raised his hands and began to demonstrate his skills to Gil. He added that to master the power of the elements, you had to activate your perception. That was what Gil needed to do. He folded the fingers of his hands so that he could make a seal. For what purpose was not clear to Gil. He stood and watched Ube, who was silently trying to show him his power. Ubby put his hand on the ground. It seemed that he had made some kind of seal. What was waiting for Gil was still a mystery. His grandfather took his time and explained to him how to activate his perception. Gil needed to feel their flow in him. Grandfather continued to tell him how to do it. Gil had to try hard to feel their presence. While he did not know how to do it all, he just watched. Grandfather finished his story and showed Gil the power of his element. A bolt of lightning struck from the sky where Ube was. Its power was incredible. Gil, watching everything, was amazed at how strong Grandpa was. His element shocked the young man. He had never seen anything like it before. Grandpa finished his seal, turned to Gil and told him everything. He made a teleporter leading outside the desert. It was a settlement of different beasts. Grandpa accidentally discovered it when he was hunting. Behind the old man's back was a sword wrapped in bandages. He reached out and added that this sword had been with him in all his battles for 10 long years. It was very dear to him. The old man handed the sword to Gil and said that he would go into the portal. Exactly 3 days later, he would reopen it. He needed him to kill the king of beasts and bring him his head. Then the test could be considered passed. Gil reached for his sword, and the old man reminded him that only by awakening the power of the elements would he be able to unleash the true power of the sword with which he would be able to kill the king of the beasts. But the old man also warned Gil that he might not come back from there. He asked him to think carefully before going there so that he would not regret it later. Gil smiled. He already knew the exact answer. The old man's words lit the fire inside Gil even more. He was ready to go into the portal. He drew his sword and confidently replied to the old man that he would have no regrets. He couldn't wait to start his new adventure where he didn't know what awaited him. Gil promised the old man that he would bring him the head of the king of beasts and would do his best not to upset him. After entering the portal, Gil received a new task to find and kill the king of beasts. The system asked for confirmation of receipt. Gil thought for a while before giving his answer. But after he adjusted himself, he confirmed the task. He felt like there was no stopping him, and he would pass the test the old man had given him. Gil had a strict time limit to complete the task. 3 days to complete it. The countdown began. The old man stood and watched as the portal took Gil to a land unknown to him. He hoped that he would pass the test with flying colors. The grandfather stood and thought about the inhabitants of the land. They were extremely strong. They could be defeated only by mastering the power of the elements. This power would help to defeat their king. And this power came from the perception of the outside world. A bright ray of light brought Gil to a place unknown to him. He had not had time to reach the ground before he realized that he was back among the sand. He stepped out of the portal confidently, and without fear he looked around. There was no danger and he could walk safely exploring the new territory. Gil walked and saw the remains of various animals. This was the location of the mission. Gil noticed the difference between this place and the desert. They were not the same. Walking a little further from the portal, the guy noticed that under his feet was not ordinary ground. It was black in color. Gil did not know why the ground was black. Gil raised his head and looked up at the sky, but there was not the slightest glimmer of light in the sky. It was a strange place. The air here was much worse than in the city. The guy smelled a bad odor. He was surprised by everything around him. After looking around, Gil didn't think about the world around him. He focused on the task at hand. His goal was to find the pack of beasts. Gil logged in to take another look at his stats. With his current level, it would be extremely difficult for him to defeat the boss. Gil urgently needed to figure out a way to raise his level before fighting the king. He stood and looked at the screen of the system, soon decided to start searching, and he thought about the battle that he was about to face. In the guy's head was a lot of thoughts. As he stood in thought, something started to attack him from behind. Gil barely had time to look back before it was already near him. It was something powerful and large. Gil had to jump aside to avoid getting hit, but for now he was only defending himself. Gil immediately wanted to see what the monster was, but he was so fast that he couldn't see it. The beast stopped. Gil looked at it, and it would seem that he had met it already on his way. The huge beast stood in front of Gil. It had an ogre-matic maw with red light bursting out of it. Its tentacles wrapped around his body. It spread its wings to intimidate the guy. Gil watched it but didn't attack. This beast was level 20, the most mysterious Rarknaya uncleanness. The beast was angry and wanted to tear Gil apart. Gil leisurely drew his sword. Even without the elemental power, this blade could still kill. Gil wanted to see how he could do it. He attacked the monster and thought to himself that it was not for nothing that his experience was constantly increasing. Now he was not a beginner and knew how to kill monsters. The beast noticed Gil coming at him. He gave out his menacing growl. He was also ready for battle. Gil ran straight at the beast. There was no more room for fear in his heart. He didn't care who his opponent was. Fear was superseded by the desire to fight. When he got to the monster, he began to chop off its tentacles one by one. Gil thought only that after killing the beast, he would gain experience, and after leveling up, he would become continuously stronger than he was. But the beast did not want to give up without a fight and made his attacks on Gil, but he managed to dodge them. He was as agile as ever in dodging. The monster, with his attacks, drove Gil to a safe distance where Gil could not chop his limbs, but Gil was not going to hesitate and rushed to the attack. The beast aimed its tentacles at Gil. It didn't want to let him near him. It was too dangerous for him and he didn't want to risk his life. To Gil, the monster's tentacles were no problem. He easily cut them down. The feeling of getting better after a victory was the best pleasure for him. The guy reached the monster, thrusting his sword deep into the monster's chest. His attack was successful. This fight was no problem for Gil. Gil swung the blade of the blade in different directions to do maximum damage to the monster. The beast no longer resisted. Death awaited it. The guy pulled the sword off the monster and was ready to end the fight. With a sharp swing of his sharp sword, Gil chopped the beast in half. Pieces of the monster's flesh were flying in different directions. There was no chance of survival. It was all over for him. After winning the fight, Gil concluded that it was not easy for him. The monster lay at his feet. For this beast, the system gave him 35,000 experience points. His level was raised to 17th. He also had 5 attribute points. Gil was satisfied. Just after finishing the fight, a whole pack of monsters were already closing in on Gil. He was in for a challenge, but he was ready. Grandpa Ubby was working in the field. Sally came to him and was outraged. Why didn't he tell her he was in that place? Why did he have to insist that Gil go there? She waited for Grandpa to give her answers. Sally stood waiting for her grandfather to give her answers, but instead he turned around and started to walk away. He asked his granddaughter to make her something to eat when he got back from the suburbs. The girl was outraged. She didn't get what she came for, and now she has to cook for him. Somewhere outside the city, late at night, there was a sound among the rocks. Someone was shouting, "More, more!" You couldn't see who was shouting and why. Someone was chopping rocks in the forest. It looked like a training session. One by one, huge rocks became small stones. They were not spared. In front of a huge rock, Boban was hitting it with his shadow sword with furious force. It looked like he was taking out his anger on the rock. He wasn't like himself. He was filled with anger. He couldn't stop and was cutting down everything in his path. He couldn't calm down. Boban smashed huge rocks over and over again. He was filled with resentment and anger. This was the first time this had happened to him. He knew no other way to pull himself together. It went on for a long time, and when he stopped to catch his breath, breathing heavily, he couldn't believe that he had actually lost to Gil. It was not in his mind. He couldn't win. Even with the power of the elements, Gil was very weak for a thug. But as it turned out, the guy wasn't simple at all, and the power of his attacks scared Boban out of his wits. He replayed the moment in his head when Uncle Ubby used a move that stopped Gil's attack, but even he found it quite difficult to do so. Boban couldn't forget Gil. He thought about him constantly. Thoughts of him were triggered in Boban's mind from the fact that he had lost. He wanted to know more about Gil, where he got such power from. What made an ordinary sapor so strong? There were no answers to be found. Gil, at that moment, was not easy. He spent attack after attack. The monsters were getting bigger and bigger. He slew almost all of them. He chopped them without much effort. The increased level gave him even more power. With each new kill, his level increased even more. Gil killed them with great speed. He liked to fight. That's why he came to this world. But he did not forget his main goal, the King of Beasts. There were many monsters. One was replaced by several new ones. They tried to kill Gil, but they could not damage him. Gil needed to defeat the monsters to level up. He needed to do so that he wouldn't have any problems with the king. He was sure the King of Beasts was very strong. He killed and killed monsters. He was willing to do it as long as he needed to. The system notifications kept alerting him to level up. When Gil killed the last beast, the system notified him that he had reached level 25. His unallocated points were 45. The last item on the list confused Gil. He didn't know what it meant. He stood there and read the notification. Around him were scattered the remains of the beasts he had chopped off. The system prompted Jill to unlock an apothecary, the price of which was 15 points. Jill wanted to figure out what kind of apothecary it was. Jill couldn't make a decision after all. He had been leveling up for so long by killing monsters, and he wasn't willing to spend 15 levels for the pharmacy. It was a real headache for him. He noted that with this cost system, the higher his level, the higher the price of anything. He wanted to calculate how much he needed to spend to buy everything he needed for the quest. The system displayed a system of calculations. It took into account all of Jill's possible purchases and came up with a final sum. The guy was shocked. To buy everything he needed, 300 points. It was a huge amount. Jill began to analyze what he should spend his points on. He wanted to accumulate enough levels to unlock the high-level sections, but for now, he was about to fight with the King of Beasts. He decided to buy medicine so he could survive. He went to the pharmacy section and selected the type of medicine he needed to buy to restore, enhance, boost skills, reload, ability, and acceleration. The list was not small, but he felt more confident with it. Gil was interested in how the medicines worked, what their abilities were, how effective they were, and he was interested in the recharge time. In addition to these properties, Gil cared about the price of these medicines. He couldn't spend too much. He realized that the medicines could be used several times and they strengthened proportionally. The more health, the more recovery. With this medicine, Jill would become invincible. Jill unlocked the pharmacy and spent 15 points. Then he decided to buy the Death of the Berserker medicine. The price was 8 points. In the end, Jill still had 2 points, but he didn't want to spend them yet. After finishing his purchases, the guy thought that he now had 2 lives and a lot of health, and Gil went on to search for the King of Beasts. He didn't have much time left to search. Gil wanted to go further, but suddenly his stomach rumbled. He wanted to eat after the brutal fights with the monsters, but he only had 2 points. He had spent a lot of energy on killing. He needed to regain his strength. He urgently needed to buy something to eat, but what he would be offered with his points remained a mystery. Gil went to the food section and saw some inexpensive loaves. He could afford them. Their main effect was to reduce his hunger. He could afford them. He took the loaf and began to eat it greedily. They were a bit tough, but they conquered his hunger. Gil remembered Sally's delicious, light, steamed pies, but he was content with what he had. Gil walked and ate the loaves. He remembered the time he had left. He had already spent 12 hours here. He still had about 60 hours left. The guy was replaying the dialogue with Ubby. He remembered that he said that the pack was in the northwest. Gil opened the map, where a point was marked. Apparently, it was the point where the pack was gathering, Gil went on. He walked around the map looking for the pack. He kept eating the loaves. He was still hungry. The system reminded Gil that he had unallocated points. It asked him to allocate them in a timely manner and warned that the changes could not be undone. Gil opened his characteristics to allocate points, but he didn't know which attribute to add them to. He had to think about it. The guy looked at the characteristics and couldn't choose what he should pump first. He didn't have enough points for all attributes. He needed to distribute them equally among all attributes so that nothing would limit him in battle. Jill had another problem. It is a lack of health, which affects the course of battle. If he gets a strong opponent, he can kill him with a single blow and he will not have time to apply the medicine. It worried Jill. Gil kept thinking about what he should do. It reminded him of a math or physics exam. Only this time, he had only one attempt to get it right. He was tired of thinking about where to allocate his points. He had no doubt that he could pump up his attributes as much as he wanted, but in battle, he just needed to choose the right strategy. Jill distributed his points between health, strength, and a little more on armor, mana, and agility. It allowed him to keep in the fight. If he managed to apply Death of the Berserker, he would be unstoppable. He finished pumping his stats and decided that now it was time for him to find a pack and complete the task. Time didn't allow him to think longer. It was morning in this city. The thick fog was dissipating under the first rays of sunlight. Everything around them was waking up and coming to life. Sally went to Grandpa Ubba's house again. She was worried about Gil. She asked if Gil would have any trouble on the mission his grandfather had sent him on. Grandpa was tending to his vegetable garden as before. He enjoyed picking at the soil. He was soothed by the process. He had heard what his granddaughter was telling him, but he still hadn't given his answer. He raised his head, stopped to weed the vegetable garden, and answered her that he had left a seal on his sword, and in case of mortal danger, he would come and save Gil. The girl calmed down a little, but she wondered why he had been so insistent on sending Gil there, and he had not told her that he had been there before. The grandfather stabbed the shovel into the ground and thought about what to say to his granddaughter's questions. Where to start, he was a little confused. He leaned on the shovel and began to answer his granddaughter. He told her how he accidentally found this place when he was hunting, but he was in no hurry to answer the second question. Grandpa turned around and headed towards the suburbs. Sally had the impression that Grandpa was hiding something from her, but she didn't know what it was. Before he left, Grandpa asked Sally to make him something to eat, but he didn't like to cook, so she thought that Grandpa had left specifically so that he wouldn't have to cook for himself. He was walking along an empty road in the woods. He was thinking a lot about Gil. His thoughts were upsetting him. He wanted to be alone with his thoughts to put them in order. Grandfather thought about the fact that he wouldn't be able to talk Gil out of trying to escape from there, but he wanted him to see the pack and see that the world wasn't so rosy, so he sent him there on a mission. Ubbi knew he had given him an impossible task, but in his heart he hoped he would be able to return with the beast's head. Hope inspired his grandfather. He thought again that he had done the right thing, because if he came back with the head of the beast, people would believe in him and would be able to go after him. Gil kept walking and walking along the endless road. He did not meet anyone on his way. He was already tired from such a long walk. Time was passing faster and faster, and he had not found anything yet. He didn't give up hope, he thought. He was already close to the pack's den, and soon he would reach them. A lot of time had already been wasted. There was a cry for help behind Gil's back. He turned around to see who was asking for help and where the sound was coming from. He was ready to help the mysterious stranger. Gil saw a girl with a baby in her arms running straight at him. Asking for help, she was scared and in tears. She was being chased. The guy did not understand where the girl and the child came from, how they managed to get to this place. Thoughts filled Gil's head. Running up to Gil, the girl kept asking him for help. He tried to calm her down and find out what happened to them, who she was running away from. The girl, shaking hand from fear, pointed in the distance and stammering, told Gil that there was a monster. She was incredibly scared. There was the sound of chains banging against each other, but who they were on and what kind of monster was there, Gil couldn't make out yet. A huge red head appeared out of the mist. The monster's mouth was covered with huge teeth that could bite anything in half. 3 monsters appeared in front of them. 2 of them were very big and red. They were carrying no less big logs. With them came their chief, but he looked like a normal man, but it was far from being so. Gil looked at the girl who, at the sight of the monsters, began to tremble even more. He asked, with his usual courage, if this monster was after her, he was ready to fight again. Suddenly, a man appeared in front of Gil. He was looking directly at Gil with a slight smile on his face. He was not going to fight him. He seemed like a kind man to Gil. The monsters that chased after the poor girl were controlled slow-moving beasts. Tank type, they had incredible attack power and great health. Chief among them was a beast-like barbarian. He was level 40. His ability was to summon giant barbarians. He could command and control them. Gil noticed that the barbarian's level was significantly higher than the monsters he had met before. It was a scout class, the same one Boban had. Gil realized the danger and asked the girl to move back behind his back. He decided that their sudden appearance was an indication that their lair was nearby, so he was heading in the right direction. Jill noticed that the girl didn't seem to be a local. Maybe they had gotten here the same way he and Grandpa Ubbi had. But Jill didn't question her. She was too scared. She held her child tightly to her. She didn't want her child to see these monsters. She wanted to keep him safe from them. Gil looked at how the girl was worried about her child, more than herself, and remembered his mother, who also protected him from any danger. The barbarian came closer and closer to them. He started the fight with threats. He turned to Gil. He offered him the pleasure of being torn to pieces. The barbarian wanted to intimidate Gil. In his eyes, Jill was just an insect. He asked Jill to keep protecting the girl, and then the barbarian could enjoy the feeling of being torn apart. Jill didn't listen to what the barbarian was saying and rushed to the attack using his incredible speed. He attacked one of the giants behind the barbarian's back. He struck the giant with his sword blow by blow. He was not intimidated by its size or its abilities. Gil could not lose to this monster. The giant was shocked that he was attacked by Gil. He was dealing him deadly damage. Gil was very powerful in his attack. He did not spare the giant. Jill gave him one last, powerful blow that sent the giant to the ground. He had taken one out of the game. Now there were 2 more left to be punished. Looking at the monster falling, Gil noticed that the giant was not completely defeated. He still had strength and health, but the guy did not want to give a chance to attack this giant and finished him in the air. The giant collapsed on the ground, chopped by Gil's sword. He did not even have time to touch Gil. No one expected that the guy easily deal with them. Gil did not stop and continued to attack the rest of the red monsters. The girl saw that she and the child were saved. The stranger defeated the monsters. She stopped shaking. She and her child didn't expect to see such power, and that they would be saved by a young guy. He didn't even know them, but he couldn't leave them to be torn apart by the merciless monsters. Gil finished his lightning attacks, which were accurate and incredibly strong. He bounced off of them. He wanted to see which of them had survived and was still continuing the fight with him. He was pleased with himself. He was stronger now that he had leveled up. Now he was hard to stop or catch off guard. He was ready to fight anyone. He liked his new skills. The barbarian stood behind Gil. He was shocked that he had defeated the monsters quickly while taking no damage. The barbarian was worried for his life. He turned to his one whole monster and ordered it to attack Gil. It was a hysterical scream from the barbarian. The dead bodies of the monsters lay on the ground, in their own blood. It was a horrible sight to all who were there. The monster did not rush to fulfill the barbarian's order. He stood staring and did not understand how he alone could defeat Gil. He had no chance to win. No chance. The monster turned around and ran away. He wanted to live. The barbarian stopped understanding what was happening and who Gil was. The barbarian shouted in the back of the fleeing monster that he was a worthless trash he didn't want to see anymore. The barbarian was going to deal with Gil himself. But the barbarian, before he could even finish his words, had a sword at his throat, and now he was in big trouble. Gil did not let him out of his sight. He told the barbarian not to move, or he would immediately blow his head off. The barbarian slowly rose from the ground to his feet. He didn't want to be left without his head, so he obeyed Gil completely. He threw his weapon from his hand and surrendered. Gil only wanted to know one thing. Why was he trying to kill these people? The barbarian wanted to scare Gil and warned him that he was a god's servant. If he harmed him, his god would haunt Gil for the rest of his days. These intimidators didn't help the barbarian. For wanting to intimidate Gil, he got a sword to the face. Gil hit him not hard. It showed him that it was better not to threaten him. Although the blow was not strong, but Gil still did some damage to the barbarian. Blood was running down the barbarian's face. He was in pain from the blow he received. Gil didn't care that he was in pain. He needed an answer to the question of how to find the lair he had come here for. Now, Gil decided to start threatening the barbarian. He explained to him that if he didn't tell him, he would kill him instead of hitting him. The barbarian raised his hand and pointed to the mountain. In a cowardly voice saying that it was there, Gil didn't think he was fooling him. There was some similarity to what the system was showing him. The barbarian's expression changed as soon as Gil turned away. He was planning something and waiting for him to turn away. While Gil was standing and looking at the distance, the barbarian jumped and ran towards the girl with the child. Gil was in a stupor. The barbarian managed to grab the girl and the child. He was glad he had succeeded, then turned to Gil. The barbarian threatened to snap their necks and drink their blood. His words made both the girl and the child start again. He added that this was his real strength. He was preparing to put his words into action. He had nothing to lose, and he was pursuing them for that purpose. Gil looked at him, but he was not afraid. He had to free them, and the barbarian, for his sneak attack on them, would be severely punished. He jumped with such speed the barbarian did not notice anything. Gil was already flying to the barbarian to stop him, but Gil was not alone that tried to save the girl and the child. The barbarian twisted his head left and right. He didn't know how to avoid this attack from both sides. He was in unreal danger. He couldn't think of anything. In such a short time, both were already too close to him. He could only smile ironically. Both blows were struck exactly in the barbarian's jaw. They practically dented the barbarian's entire face. It looked incredible, but who was? The other one was a mystery. From these blows, the barbarian flew from that place very far away. The blows were very strong, and the barbarian was thrown away from the people he was attacking. The girl and the child were saved again, but Gil did not understand who the other guy was, and why he also decided to save them was unclear. Gil looked at the other guy carefully. What he needed he didn't say, and he didn't give his name yet. Gil was concentrated and didn't relax. The unfamiliar guy noted Gil's punching technique and praised him for that punch. Gil's technique seemed pretty good to him. The others who arrived with the strange guy were helping the poor girl up. Gil didn't know who they were and wanted to find out. He didn't understand how they got here. The stranger told Gil his story. He and the boys had been here 3 days ago and they had been attacked by a beast-like creature. He had kidnapped one of them and they had followed his footsteps. That's how they had ended up in that place. He held out his hand to Gil with a smile on his face and told him his name. His name was Bros, a class warrior. He was pleased to meet a new man. Bros wanted to introduce him to the other people who had arrived with him. He pointed to the hooded guy. It was an assassin named Philog. He nodded in affirmation. He then pointed to a pretty, short-haired girl. She was a healer. Her name was Rachel. After Bros introduced him to everyone, Gil held out his hand in return and said his name was Chen Gil, but asked that they just call him Gil. When everyone had gotten acquainted, Bros seriously asked Gil if he knew why they were there, what they needed. Gil gave a short but clear answer. He didn't know why they were there, but it seemed to him that one of them did know that information. It was the barbarian. The beast man still couldn't recover from Bros and Gil's attack. He couldn't see the stealth attack either. The barbarian noted that humans can be very unpredictable. He was angry with them. The beast man hated humans and wanted to destroy them all. He had made a promise to himself that he thought he would be able to fulfill someday. They all approached the beastman, who was lying on the ground. They surrounded him. He looked up and realized what they were doing around him. The barbarian lay there angry. He threatened each and every one of them. To his god, they were just food, insects. He promised them that he would destroy them all. For such words, Jill decided to punish him by lightly hitting him on the head. The beastman had no way of knowing how he knew his name. It was impossible. Jill leaned over to him, leaning on his sword, and told the barbarian that he had a few questions for him, and he wanted to hear some truthful answers. He warned him once he found out the barbarian had lied to him, then death awaited him. Jill would not spare him for not telling the truth. They lifted the beastman and bound his hands with rope. He was their prisoner while they bound him. The rest of the team helped the girl and her child recover. When they were done, Jill and the rest of the men had to leave. They had to get to their lair at all costs. To do so, they banded together and went on a dangerous journey. Jin listened carefully to the barbarian. He claimed to be telling them the truth. He told them everything he knew. The barbarian continued, "The monsters thought humans were just food sent to them by the gods. He didn't want to do anything wrong. He was just following orders." Everyone standing behind Gil, hearing the barbarian's words, was at a loss to understand who was giving such cruel orders to the barbarian. It was raining in the city of Dalkov. From a huge building that looked like a church, voices were heard, one of them saying that Grandpa Ubby had gone mad. It was not clear what was going on inside the building. Grandpa Ubby stood silently in front of the main men from the town. One of them noted that Ubby was still as naive as he had been years ago. It was still unclear what they were talking about. More and more questions were asked by Ubby, a guy with green hair. He couldn't believe that Grandpa could find the temple. He was sure that getting into the temple would be very difficult, almost impossible. This guy's name was Hicks, and his element was air. He kept convincing the others that the entrance to the temple was guarded by monsters that could not be defeated, and that Grandpa was putting his hopes in vain on a boy who didn't have any elemental powers yet. Everyone knew what would happen if they angered the gods. The whole village would be in danger. They could not let that happen. It was their only refuge. They wanted Ubby to kill the boy. Hicks, looking at Ubby's grandfather, told him if he did what they asked him to do, then he would be forgiven. Hicks was shocked by his grandfather's words. Ubby was not going to kneel before those who did not consider them human, but simply saw them as food and prey. Ubby continued his rant. He accused them of giving up innocent people to be tortured in exchange for peace and quiet, that they made up fables about heroes to cover their cowardice. Ubby did not choose his words and said what he thought. Grandfather's eyes were on Hicks, a young boy, and he told him that he was walking on other people's heads and that Hicks was scared to death of monsters. Hicks was even angrier at his grandfather's words. He couldn't believe what he had said. He wanted to punish Ubby for saying such things to him. He channeled the power of his element into Ubby's grandfather, who stood calmly waiting for the attack. Hicks wanted to kill him for what he said. Grandpa was calm. His indifference made his blood run cold. He didn't pay attention to the fact that Hicks' attack was almost upon him. Ubby blocked without even raising his hands. It wasn't a difficult attack for him. He was sure that Hicks wouldn't be able to damage him. Hicks watched as his attack crashed through his grandfather's defense. He couldn't believe it. He thought he was a very strong opponent, but Grandpa Ubby wasn't easy at all. Ubby did not respond to his attack. He only said that such a life was not for him, and he could not risk others saving himself. His weapons would always be used only to protect the innocent. He put on his hat and started to walk away. He was sure he was capable of protecting the innocent from their so-called god. Grandpa Ubba had no fear of him. Hicks was just boiling with anger and rage. He wanted Grandpa to learn a lesson that he couldn't talk to him like that. Hicks was about to attack the departing Ubby again. The man sitting next to Hicks, who had his face hidden under a hood, raised his hand and ordered Hicks to stop his attempts to attack the old man. Hicks looked at Ubby and craved only one thing, to get even with him. To him, this was an insult, and clenched his teeth and had to stop his attack, something he didn't want to do at all. In his darkened mind, Gil thought that being in a place where people were just prey for monsters, a place that even the players had forgotten about, there was only one fate waiting for them as non-player characters that he didn't want to think about. He realized that when he met Grandpa Ubby, Sally, and the rest of his companions, it was no longer a game for him, but something more. Gil thought he needed to find the temple and help them all get out of the game. Now he could no longer be on his own, nor could he be responsible only for himself. This was a responsibility he had placed upon himself. He remembered seeing a book about ancient mythology, and there Jill read that Kybri was an incarnation of the god Ra. He remembered that the barbarian was obliged to guard this temple. Jill began to think in what direction the temple could be. The only thing that troubled Gil was that he didn't understand what the monsters were supposed to be guarding, and whether there might be a hidden temple nearby. Gil finished his thought. He was distracted by something. He stood there not paying attention to what his companions were doing. He was thinking about how to find the temple, but his loneliness was interrupted when he heard his name and was distracted from his thoughts. Bros called out to Gil and told him that they were ready. It was time for them to move on to the monster's lair. Time was not on their side. Gil and his new company set out to find it. The monsters probably weren't the only danger that awaited them along the way. The boy thought that staying in this place would be the safest thing to do. The further they went, the more danger grew for them. They couldn't leave a girl with a child alone in this place full of monsters. Bros decided to leave Rachel. She could not only heal wounds but also had the skill to amplify the power of her element. He could take care of them. Rachel agreed to stay with them and protect them from all sorts of monsters. She was sure she could do the job. She convinced the others. Then they decided it was time to set off, the three of them and their captive barbarian, who would lead them straight to the monster's lair. The Beastman told everyone who went with him not to blame him if they were eaten there. He was warning them of the danger in the lair. Gil replied to the barbarian with a calmness in his voice that he feared more for his life. The king of monsters could kill him for leading them to the lair. Gil's words angered the barbarian. He would have pounced on him, but his hands were tied. He told Gil that he was not the kind of monster that feared death. Bros got tired of listening to the monster. He shut him up and ordered him to go forward, but the barbarian suddenly started to discourage them even more. It was obvious that he was very much afraid and didn't want to go to the lair. In the lair, the monsters gathered near the throne of the king. 4 monsters carried a cage. From it came cries for help. Inside the cage sat people. It looked like they were about to kill them. They came to the throne and knelt down in front of the king. The monsters told him that this was all the food they could find. They were trying to please the king and stay alive. The king sat and said nothing. He was harsh and knew no mercy. The king paid attention to what his slaves had brought him. It was time for the food. The king didn't have time to eat the cage people. Suddenly, all his monsters were covered in ice. He couldn't see who dared to attack him. After making sure that all the monsters were neutralized, a guy entered the lair. He told the king that he was the great magician Ngamu. He came to save the people who were brought as food to the king. Ngamu did not come to the lair alone. He was accompanied by several experienced warriors. Ngamu suggested that they join forces and destroy all the monsters that were there. He was determined. The brave mage wanted to finish them all off for the suffering they had inflicted on so many people. It was unforgivable to him. He wanted revenge. Ngamu began to threaten the king, preparing to attack him with the power of his magic. He promised him that he would answer for everything he had done, for all the suffering he had caused innocent people. He attacked the king with the spell Ice Blades. It was a powerful attack that should kill the king of monsters, without Ngam himself even needing to approach him. The king was sitting on his throne keeping an icy calm. He saw the blades flying at him. The king put up his shield and the attack did not do any damage to him. Mage Ngamu couldn't believe that his attack didn't reach the target. It was his strongest attack, but he didn't want to give up and was preparing a new attack. But suddenly, his whole body was paralyzed. He couldn't move a finger. He didn't understand what was happening to him. The warriors standing nearby were confused. They didn't know how they could help Ngamu. Now the attack was for the king. He sat on his throne, also keeping calm. He was too strong for them. The monster lifted the mage above the rest of the warriors. He did not know what the king would do next. The king crushed the mage in the air with his attack. The blood splattered on the warriors below. He killed him without getting up from his throne. He had immense power. Finding themselves completely covered in Ngmu's blood, the warriors were very scared and didn't know what this attack was. They were in big trouble. Death was waiting for them. The king of monsters was level 85. His name was Finyar. He was too bored. Everyone who attacked him was weak. He killed everyone without difficulty. In the lair, he was getting bored. He wanted to find a worthy opponent. On the way to the lair, Jill and his comrades fought new monsters. Bros killed the beast-like ones with lightning and powerful attacks. Assassin. Phylog used magic and defeated one monster after another. He was a strong mage and warrior. He did not spare his enemies. Gil was unstoppable in his attacks. The monsters fled from him and his sword. He was becoming incredibly strong. He was getting short of monsters. He wanted to level up before coming to the lair. The beast-like barbarian who was standing tied up couldn't believe that they were all so strong that they couldn't be killed by other monsters no matter how hard they tried. He noticed that Jill was stronger than the others. Since their fight, it was as if he had gotten stronger. It scared the barbarian a lot. The barbarian wanted to know who Gil was, how he got there, why he was so strong. He was still a mystery to him. Jill noticed that the closer they got to the lair, the more monsters became. Their fighting power and level also increased, but this did not prevent Jill from killing them. After the fight, Jill decided to study his characteristics. He saw that his level was reset, but the experience required to move to the next level remained the same and corresponded to his previous level. The guy thought, although the monsters were pumping experience well, but the rate of increase in game level was rapidly falling. They needed to accelerate in search of a lair. Gil stood and waited for the others. Bros approached him with a smile. It seemed to him that Gil was not yet used to the fighting power of the monsters, but Gil was not simple, and he did not care about the power of these monsters. Although they were slow, it took a lot of effort to kill a monster. This was the first time Bros had seen a person who killed them with such ease without having the power of the elements. Bros stood and marveled at Jill's skills. He couldn't believe his eyes when he saw him attacking. Jill listened intently to what Bros was saying. He offered Jill to join his guild when they got out of this mysterious place. He could use such a brave guy. Gil looked at him and with a surprised look on his face wanted to clarify what kind of guild he was interested in. Bros immediately wanted to entice the guy, saying that there were some very beautiful girls there, and if Gil wanted to join them, he would introduce him to the girls, but Gil had no idea what Bros was talking about. Phylog intervened in their conversation. He heard Bros luring Jill. He asked Bros if he told Jill that he was the only member of the guild. Bros blushed. He felt a little embarrassed. Bros laughed hard at the awkward moment. Phylog put him in an extremely stupid position. He quickly replied that Phylog was joking and tried to change the subject to finding a lair. As they moved on, time was running out and they hadn't found the lair yet, and there was still a tough fight ahead with the king of monsters. Suddenly, Phylog called out to Bros and Gil and pointed his finger to something that looked like an entrance. In front of them was a huge entrance to a cave. It must be the lair of all the beasts, they thought, and went inside, not knowing what was waiting for them. Jill turned around to ask the barbarian Roshidler if they had come to the right place or if it was not their lair, but the barbarian was silent. Jill smelled something wrong. He turned to look at him, for there was no answer from the prisoner. Gil was surprised. Roshidler had escaped. They had not even noticed how he had untied the ropes on his hands. Now there was no one to lead them. Bros also noticed that the barbarian had escaped and with a smirk on his face said that he was probably scared of them, and that's why he decided to run away. Gil and Phylog didn't say anything. They had other things on their minds now. Roshidler, running away, was very happy that he managed to fool them and escape. He was happy to be alive. He ran as fast as he could. He thought he should hurry up and report everything to the king. He thought he could get a reward for his valuable information. The three boys stood at the entrance and couldn't figure out if they had come to the right place or if it was a trap from the barbarian. But as they got closer to the cave, they realized they had come to the right place and there was a lair in front of them. Bros noted that from the smell, it was definitely their lair. The smell was horrible. He remembered the barbarian and added that he wasn't lying and had led them to the right place. They tried to make up their minds to go inside the cave. They didn't know what was waiting for them, and if they could survive in there, Bros calmed down and suggested they go inside to investigate the lair. The trio walked through the narrow entrance where torches lit their way. They noticed that there were many human skulls. They had no doubt that they had come to the lair. They continued walking, but it was strange that during this time they did not meet any monsters, as if they had all disappeared, and it was just an ordinary cave. When they came out of the narrow passage, their attention was fixed on a certain object. On their faces there was surprise and confusion. It looked like finding the king would not be easy. They had 3 paths that left them stumped. They had to come up with a plan to keep the 3 of them from dying in the cave, but they were willing to take the risk. Bros told them that it looked like they would have to split up. He was serious now. The danger that awaited them in this place could kill them. He gave Jill and Figol the Firepath seal. It was the first time Jill had seen such a seal, and he didn't know what it was or how it worked. Bros explained the purpose of the seal. Each of them would go through their own tunnel. If one of them found answers or was in danger, they only had to read the spell, and the other 2 would instantly teleport to him. Now they had to decide who would go to which tunnel. Bros decided that he would go to the tunnel on the left, Phylog would go to the right, and Gil would go to the center tunnel. The choice was made, and they were ready to go into the unknown. Before entering their tunnels, Bros reminded them that if they encountered danger, they should recite the spell he had shown them. Both nodded positively to Bros. Gil was running through his tunnel and couldn't find anything. He needed to level up, but as luck would have it, there were no monsters in the tunnel to fight. He didn't understand what was wrong. He ran and still did not meet any monsters, but suddenly something caught his eye. He could not clearly see what was there. Gil saw the corpse of a girl, over which stood the monsters. They devoured her. The monsters did not realize the presence of Gil in the tunnel. In front of Jill were scavenger vampires. They were level 47. They had long claws and a wide mouth with huge fangs. The mere sight of them terrified the victim. Scattered around the vampires were scattered naked bones and skeletons. One vampire saw Gil in their tunnel. These creatures cast by both god and devil, they had the most powerful bite, but they were intolerant of sunlight. These creatures rarely hunted alone. They always went in packs. Gil didn't know what the hell it was. He grabbed his sword and prepared to attack and kill these monsters that were destroying people. He ran deeper into the tunnel to deal with the vampires, but waiting for him was a whole army of vampires who came out of their caves smelling fresh flesh and blood. They tried to intimidate Gil with their menacing screams. There were so many of them that it was extremely difficult to deal with them, but Gil was not afraid and did not back down from the battle. Rashidler, the barbarian, had already run to his master and was ready to tell him everything about the approach of the three warriors. He fell on his knees in front of Lord Finir, who was ready to listen to the beast-like barbarian. Rashidler told the Lord that 3 insects had entered the lair, but they were trapped. The Lord remained calm. He was in no danger. The barbarian finished his report and stood waiting for the Lord's reply. Lord Finir was sure that they were most likely already torn to pieces by the scavenger vampires, and there was no point in worrying about it. Gil stood in front of the vampires in full alert. He knew that their combat power was not high, but their numbers impressed him. This was a great chance for him to gain more experience. He rushed into the attack and one by one started killing the vampires that couldn't damage him. For every 10 scavengers, he got 2,000 experience points. He was unstoppable. Gil attacked them over and over again. He was killing a bunch of them, but they wouldn't stop. It was wearing him out a bit. He was getting a little tired of killing. He had already gained enough experience to level up. He needed to hurry up and finish off the vampires. Gil, during the battle, he received a system notification. The number of scavengers he had killed had reached 99. He had successfully leveled up and had reached 3 class skills. The system warned that Gil could only choose 2 skills. He had a hard choice to make. He couldn't make a choice based on their descriptions that the system gave him. Gil read the skill information again. Divine Blessing and Punishing Light complemented each other perfectly. While Holy Strike and Divine Blessing gave double the health regeneration effect, the choice was difficult for him. In any case, all the skills were for close combat. They had the ability to regenerate. Using Divine Blessing, he could get close to the enemy and strike him with Punishing Light or Holy Strike. Gil wanted to go through all the possible options to choose the skills. Gil couldn't make a decision quickly. It was about his characteristics, and he had a tough fight ahead of him. He discarded the Punishing Light option. Because of the attack range of this skill, it wasn't the best option, and Gil continued to go through the options. After thinking through all the options available to him, he chose Divine Blessing and Holy Strike. They suited him best. After making his decision, Gil remembered his comrades. He wondered how they were doing, and if they were alive. Gil assumed that if there were no signs on the seal, they were fine, and Gil continued on his way. Gil ran even faster to complete the task he had come here to do. He couldn't let his grandfather down. He had given him his word that he would be up to the task. Bros was in his tunnel fighting vampires like Gil. So far, there was no danger to him. He was defeating his enemies with the spell Hellfire, which was burning his enemies. The fire killed the vampires mercilessly. They screamed in pain before they died, the fire burning everything in its path. Suddenly, the sounds of music came to Bros. He didn't understand what it was and couldn't make out what song was coming to his ears. Among the burnt corpses of vampires, Bros saw a silhouette in the fog that reminded him of a girl. She was the one singing the song he didn't recognize. She walked slowly and kept humming the tune. Broken shackles dangling from her legs, she stepped out of the mist and headed straight for Bros. She was blindfolded. Her hands resembled the long claws of a beast. From the looks of it, she seemed like an ordinary girl, but it was much more complicated than that, and Bros needed to keep his guard up or death awaited him. Bros realized that she was the one controlling the vampires and she was the one ordering them to kill humans. He wasn't going to spare her. He only wanted to turn her to ash. Suddenly, she stopped singing and laughed at Bros' words. She didn't see him as a threat. Her vampires were already ready to attack him again. Instantly from the ground, huge shadowy hands enveloped Bros. He was not prepared for the attack and did not know how to dodge the attack and stay alive. Bros couldn't move anymore. His body was bound by the monster's attack. Bros thought he was trapped by the song the monster girl was singing. It seemed to him that there was no way out. She approached Bros, who was restrained. She touched him and then licked him. She was pleased with her catch. The monster pulled out her long tongue and pointed it towards Bros' face. He could do nothing. She told him she hadn't had such a delicious meal in a long time and was going to lick him. A huge shadowy hand grabbed the poor guy's face and started to choke him. The girl monster wanted to stretch her pleasure before killing Bros, who already thought he was going to die. But suddenly, at a frantic, incredible speed, Gil ran to his aid, who was already close and ready to attack the monster. Gil made his first attack on the monster, which had already almost killed Bros. Jill chopped off both of the girl's arms with his sword to the monster, thus disarming it. The shadowy arms gradually disintegrated from Bros's body. The monster's magic was no longer working, and he was practically ripped from the monster's clutches. Gil barely managed to save his comrade. He saw that Bros was in a state of shock. Gil asked him how long he was going to stand there, but Bros gave no answer. The monster girl looked at Jill with surprise, who stopped her from eating her prey. He asked what happened to the monster named Delic, and was surprised that the monster didn't finish him off. Jill didn't take long to answer and threw something in the monster's direction, adding if she was asking him about him. He threw under her feet the head of Delic, which he killed. She saw it, and thought that he may have been stronger than the other monsters, but apparently it was not enough to defeat Jill. After that, the monster girl started attacking Jill with her song, which almost killed Bros. Jill stood quietly and did nothing. Bros, who was standing behind him, tried to warn Jill not to allow her song, but then his injury prevented him from finishing his sentence. The song reached Gil's ears. It was the song of the Enchantress, the monster's main weapon. The effect of this spell was paralysis, and it seemed Gil had fallen for the Enchantress trap. The sorceress was sure that her song had completely paralyzed them both, and she could now kill and eat them, but she couldn't even finish her sentence. She stood there, not understanding what was going on. She herself was as if paralyzed from what she saw soon. The Enchantress's song had no effect on Gil, and he chopped off her head at full speed with his new skill, Divine Blessing. The Enchantress was defeated. Giselle, after blowing off the sorceress's head, added that she sings terribly, and he was glad that he had managed to snatch his comrade from the sorceress's clutches. Bros, who had been watching the fight and healing his wounds, looked at Gil and smiled, surprised at how strong he had been in the fight with the sorceress. Bros and Gil felt something wrong. The seal he was putting on, everyone started to burn on their hands. They didn't know what had happened, but they were ready to fight the monsters again. Gil raised his hand with the seal and saw it burning. They had no doubt that Philog was in danger and needed to be rescued immediately. In the tunnel where Philog was, he was attacked by a level 55 hell python. It was a sinister creature that dwells in hell. Its body was shrouded in hellfire. This monster used fire attacks. Philog was in great danger. The distance between him and the python was too great, and he couldn't attack it. All he could do was hold back its attacks. He realized that he had to do something or the python would kill him. It was impossible to defend himself all the time. The python was too strong for him. One of the python's attacks broke through Philogoo's defenses, and a ball of flame hit him, and he was thrown backwards by the impact. He flew with all his might into the rock behind him. He was losing this fight. The chances of him dying were high. The python, after a successful attack, was preparing to finish Philog off. Flames were coming out of its mouth. Philog thought it was over for him. The python had defeated him. Philog was sitting on the Skalanu and couldn't move. He could see the fire python moving towards him, its jaws wide open. The monster wanted to swallow him whole. It was very close. Philog was sitting and was ready to die, but his comrades came to his aid. Gil stood in front of him to repel the python's attack. Jill attacked the huge snake, giving it a powerful electric shock. The snake wriggled in pain. Now it had to defend itself from the attacks. The guy watched as the snake wriggled in pain. Eventually, it collapsed to the ground, and it seemed to him that the danger was over and that the snake had been killed. Gil turned to Philog and apologized to him for the delay in their journey and for having to fight off the python alone. Philog was glad that Jill and Bros had gotten to him in time to help him and that he had survived, and he noted that Jill had become incredibly strong compared to him. Standing next to Philog, Bros told them that if he and Jill were trapped in their tunnels, this way was the only way back and that this was the king's lair. Philog was sitting on the ground trying to recover from a heavy python attack. He looked up and called out to Brosa with a smile on his face. You could tell by the look on his face that he hadn't fully recovered yet. Bros picked up Philog and asked him if he was okay. Bros was worried about his friend's condition. Philog gave him a positive answer, adding that it wasn't time to die yet. All the fun was ahead. Philog was surprised that this giant snake was very strong. He had never seen anything like it before. He became scared. What if? And he abruptly stopped talking without another word. Bros was tensed by what he saw. He thought that if they faced the king of monsters, it was likely that someone like him would die first. This thought was lodged deep in Bros' mind. Gil stood and listened to what his comrades were saying. He was confident and showed no fear. He told them that it was not the king that would destroy them, but their own fear. He explained to them that shaking with fear on the battlefield only brings you closer to death. There was only one king against them. They shouldn't be so afraid. When they got out, they would be ready to fight any monster in their way. Gil was very serious. His expression changed. He tried to encourage his comrades. He was ready to sacrifice himself for them. Gil's words encouraged them, and the fear receded. He was ready to fight until his last breath. For the sake of his comrades, for their freedom, he was not ready to give up until the very end. They agreed and were about to go further into the den, but suddenly a huge python appeared in front of them, which had regained its strength and was ready to attack them. Gil, who was standing in front of them, called out to his comrades to defeat all these creatures that were killing and devouring innocent people. All three of them were on full alert, ready to kill anyone who got in their way, but they were about to fight a fire python that was incredibly strong. Bros rushed to attack the snake. While it stood and waited, he was joined by Gil. They acted together to defeat the monster and not get killed. Bros ran up to the snake and shouted to it that it was paying attention to him. He challenged it to a duel, not thinking about what consequences awaited him. The python saw the little man standing near him. He tried again to do damage with a fiery attack. He aimed his maw at Bros below. The snake made an attack and fired firepower at Bros. He managed to dodge. His speed did not fail him. A powerful stream of fire swept past him. Phylog watched Bros and Gil and didn't take part in the fight. He couldn't just stand by and watch. He had to prepare to unleash his power to help his friends take down the monster. He prepared to begin his attack. He couldn't become a burden to them again. He was ready to do everything possible that was in his power. Phylog used all his magic and power. He recited the spell Palm of Kshitigarbha. The spell was powerful and should help them in fighting the python. An Ogrim stone hand appeared in front of the python and grabbed the snake and immobilized it. It was caught in Phylog's attack. Bros signaled to Gil that the snake had been attacked and was now immobilized. Now it could be easily attacked. They had the opportunity. Jill stood at the top of the hill and waited for a chance to strike the snake from above. After receiving the signal, Jill accelerated and jumped at the python. He flew at it with his sword in hand, preparing to thrust it into it. He thrust his blade straight into the fire python with all his might. His attack had reached its target. Now he could finish it off. With his attack, Jill had damaged the python's armor by 20%. He wasn't going to stop. It was still far from complete destruction. He needed to attack it again and harder. Jill was hitting harder and harder. More and more of them. The python's armor could not withstand it. It was already 50% damaged. Jill was unstoppable. The python was wounded but still very dangerous. It could attack his friends or Jill himself, but the incredibly strong guy didn't give him a chance. He put his sword all over the python's body. Finally, after so many attacks, the python's armor was 100% damaged. It was shattered. Phylogod dispelled his spell, and his hand let go of the python. But it wasn't the end for the snake. Gil realized it was time to use his final attack to kill the monster. There was no stalling, and he plunged his sword right into the python's head. He jumped off the huge snake, hiding his sword. The snake writhing in pain. Only death awaited it, its blood flying in different directions. They were able to defeat the monster. Bros was delighted with the way Gil had dealt with the python. He asked him not to slow down and continue. Phylog stood with his mouth open. What was happening had taken away his speech. The python burned alive in its own fire. It was completely melted. For killing the python, Jill received 200,000 experience points. He was getting stronger and stronger before the main fight. For killing the hidden monster, Gil received a hidden equipment, fire gloves. They were made of hellfire and were used by a ghostly general called Higsley. They were the best defense equipment. Gil scrutinized the information on the gear. With it, he had a good chance of increasing his levels by a few points. This made him happy. He applied his new equipment, fire gloves. He felt strong and invulnerable. He was ready to fight the king of monsters. Bros stood behind Gil. He thought that even though they had been separated for a few hours, Gil already looked like he had undergone an incredible transformation. Bros wanted to know what had happened to him in his tunnels, how he had become so pumped up. He still couldn't figure out who Gil was, how he got here. He was troubled by this question from time to time, especially in the moments of Gil's display of his abilities. He was a mystery to him. All three of them stood thinking about how to go on and how to defeat the king. They heard a noise that was very close by. It was not clear what kind of monster was coming at them, but they were ready for battle. From around the corner in the tunnels, the monster was watching them. It wasn't attacking them. It was gathering information on them, but it had been spotted. Now it was in danger. Jill and Bros looked at each other. They realized they had to be the first to attack it while they had the chance. They simultaneously jumped up and attacked the monster like the first time they met. It was a quick and effective attack. With their attack, they hit the monster and it flew away from the blow. The monster didn't have time to block the blow. They were too fast for it. As they ran up to the monster, they were surprised to see Rashidler, the barbarian who had escaped from them. Bros told him that he had been caught by them for nothing. After his shameful act, he wanted to deal with the monster. Rashidler, who was lying on the floor, tried to save his life by telling them that he was lost. Apparently, the king had activated the traps. He was afraid they would start beating him again. Bros was pissed off by his words. Gila didn't understand what traps the barbarian was talking about, But it was no surprise to him. After all, they had some monsters on their path. Rashidler rose to his feet. He was surprised that they were still alive, despite the fact that they had fallen into the traps that the king had cleverly set. Bros kicked the monster with his foot. He didn't like the barbarian's words. He ordered him to take them to the king and keep them alive. The barbarian agreed to take them. He knew exactly where to go. He showed them where the entrance was. Before the entrance they stopped. They didn't want the barbarian to trick them a second time. Bros warned the barbarian that if he pulled any tricks, he would destroy him on the spot without a second thought. Rashidler agreed to the terms. He was scared. He didn't want to die. He went to the entrance and quietly told the gate to open. He led them to the king himself. After the barbarian's words, the huge gate, slowly, was opened in front of them. They were walking to meet the unknown. They might never walk out of that gate back again. It was raining lightly in the city. Grandpa Ubby was walking slowly around the house, thinking about something. It looked like he was going somewhere. He was preparing for something. Grandpa approached the closet and was ready to open it, but he stopped to think again. He didn't know why he was in the closet. He made up his mind and opened the doors of the closet. There was his armor, in which he had gone to battle many times, but he had not worn his armor for a long time. Grandpa did not want to be in battle again. Behind the old man's back at the entrance to the room stood Boban. He did not attack him. Boban spoke to him calmly, that despite all the doubts, Ube had decided to open the room. As a child, the old man had never allowed him or Sally to go near this room. Boban had always wondered what was behind the doors of this room, but when he saw that it was his armor, Boban laughed. Boban was sure that sealed all this time in this room was his desire to escape. Grandfather listened to him and could not understand how he got in silently, that he did not even notice. He had come to the old man because he had heard that he was recruiting a team to escape from the desert. They had a great chance of meeting the monster that had killed his parents. It was a real chance for him to avenge them. That was why he had come to the old man. Boban was determined. He wanted to join their team. He hoped that the old man wouldn't discourage him this time and would take him with him. Walking down the tunnel, Bros shouted to Rashidler not to even try to pull something again and set them up. If he betrayed them, there would be no mercy. They would kill him. Bros grabbed him from behind by the neck and began to choke him a little. He once again threatened him with death for betraying them, but the barbarian wasn't going to set them up. He showed them the way. They had to go right where the Great Hall was. There was a king of monsters. Gil looked at the beast-like man with a heavy look. He tried to ask him where the people the monsters had brought were imprisoned. He wanted to save them. Rashidler answered him with confidence that he naturally knew where the place was. He knew these places well. Gil was going to go to the king, but before he did, he told Bros that when Philoga got to the Great Hall, he needed to give orders to the barbarian to take you into custody. That way, they could get to the right place and save the rest of the people. Bros was a little hurt by Gil's words, and he told him not to get cocky just because he'd saved them, but he tried to hurt Gil too, saying that he wasn't as strong as he thought he was, and that they couldn't blame it on him alone. Gil, hearing what Bros was saying to him, was a little upset. He didn't want to hurt them. He wanted to keep them out of danger. He didn't have time to explain anything to Bros before the system notified him that danger was coming, and now they were in for a hard test. In front of Gil, the system displayed a notification that warned that an unknown boss had been discovered nearby. Based on Gil's stats, the chance of survival was 10%. The King of Monsters was incredibly strong. Gil accepted the mission. He raised his level as much as he could and didn't even reach the power of the elements. The chances of completing this mission were too slim, but it was too late to retreat. He didn't want to tell his comrades that the chance of survival was too small and they could all die. Philog saw that Gil was upset, but he didn't know what the matter was yet. Gil didn't want to drag innocent people into their fight, so he asked Bros once again. As soon as they entered the hall and saw the people, they were to be released and run away, and the boss Gil wanted to take over. When Gil finished, Bros, who was standing behind him, contradicted him and said that there was no way they would leave him alone. Gil was surprised by his answer. Bros was trying to explain to Gil that he would never let his comrade go into the field alone. He couldn't just sit on the sidelines while others risked their lives. After listening, Gil turned to Bros and told him that that monster wasn't as easy as they might have thought. There was only a 10% chance of winning. Someone could die in this fight. Bros was not frightened by Gil's words. If he hadn't come to their aid a while ago, they would have been dead already. Even if the odds were slim, he wouldn't run away. Bros looked at Philog and saw that he nodded positively at his words. Gil listened to Bros and remembered his childhood. He had always been alone. At school and in keto classes, he was alone. He went through all the tests alone, although there were not many. But now, he saw that he was no longer alone, and he was surrounded by loyal friends who would not leave him in trouble. The barbarian pointed out to them that the main hall was in a straight line from them. He didn't want to go there. He offered to guard them. It was better for him than if he just killed him. They finished their conversations, then they saw that there was a huge dark entrance in front of them. The barbarian begged them to leave him there. Rashidler told them that if they wanted to die, then please go to the main hall, to the king of monsters, and he didn't want to be involved. Bros and Jill looked at each other and decided to feel sorry for the barbarian who kept his promise and led them to the lair. Leaving the barbarian, they went to the main entrance. They entered the hall and saw an empty throne in front of them. They couldn't understand where the king had disappeared to. They decided it was another trap. They were ready. They were angry at the absence of the king. They had traveled a long way. They had tried to kill them many times, and when they reached the lair, there was not a soul in it. Jill asked Rashidler if he was the one who said that their king was in this place, but there was no one on the throne. He said he didn't understand what was going on. The place was usually full of guards. The barbarian was shocked. Suddenly, there was a rumbling noise that attracted the attention of all who entered. The passage they had entered began to close. They were trapped. The barbarian saw that the exit was blocked. He didn't understand what was happening. Who had locked them in? He was very scared for his life. Suddenly, Phylog began to glow green. His body seemed to be paralyzed. What was happening to him no one could understand. Phylog screamed terribly in pain. He was gradually being killed. He was lifted into the air and the pain was getting worse. Bros looking on didn't know how he could help him. The barbarian fell to the ground in fear, but there was nowhere to run. On the throne suddenly sat King Finir. No one noticed how he appeared and started attacking them. For him, it was all just a usual fun that brought him no joy. Finir was killing Phylog little by little. He was spitting blood. The end was near. They had to come up with something to save their comrade. Gil watched Phylog die painfully. He couldn't let that happen. He had to do something about it or he would be torn to pieces. He made the only right decision. He started to attack the king so he could save his friend. He was willing to sacrifice himself for that. Gil was near Finir and wanted to thrust his sword into him with all the strength he had. The king was still sitting on his throne and didn't try to dodge the attack. He brought his sword over the monster's head and struck it with a powerful blow, but Finir put up his flawless shield and Gil's attack failed. Jill bounced away from the king to avoid his attack. Jill had already realized how strong the king was, and he didn't want to underestimate him. Jill's attack distracted the king from killing Phylog. He started to fall head down to the ground. He was unconscious. Bros tried his best to catch him so he wouldn't take more damage. Bros managed to catch him centimeters off the ground. It was obvious that Phylog needed immediate help. He didn't say anything but moaned in pain. Gil was near the throne. He did everything to save Phylog. He turned the king's attention away from his attack, but Gil couldn't understand when he even appeared on the throne. The king sat there smiling madly. He was amused by the people. Gil couldn't believe that he had defused his attack so easily. It was unthinkable. Defeating him would be extremely difficult. Phylog came to his senses and began to do a recovery spell. He was almost at the limit of his abilities. Bros asked him not to overdo it. He was still weak. He replied to Bros that he was fine and could continue the fight. He didn't want to seem like a weak link to them. He had to show them his strength. After regaining his strength, Phylog cast a spell that lifted Bros up on a huge block of stone so he could attack the king. The king sat on his throne and watched them. He saw their every move. He remained calm. He was protected by his trusty shield. Bros aimed the block straight at Finir, who saw the attack but didn't dodge it. It was already near him. Bros jumped off it at the last moment. He jumped down to make his own fiery attack. He wanted to burn the king to avenge his friend. The block crashed into the king's shield on one side and Bros on the other. He wanted to break his defenses and lure the king onto the battlefield. To Bros' attack, Jill joined in. He thrust his blade into the king's protective dome. The defense was very hard to break for them. After their attacks, the protective dome shattered. The explosion from it was incredibly loud and strong. The walls of the lair shook from the explosion, but the king disappeared again and escaped the attack. Gil noticed an unusual green glow around them. He realized that they were being attacked by the king, but from where and how he was carrying out the attack was not clear to Gil. Finir stood smiling. He played with them as he wished. He could have killed them at any moment, but he was fascinated by the process of killing people. He raised his hands to create a spell. What kind of attack it would be and how strong it would be, no one could guess. The king was unrealistically strong. Gil tried to jump away from the green light. He was safer in the distance and he wanted to see what the king had in store for them. He saw a huge green sphere that kept growing and gaining destructive power. They could all die from it. Bros and Phylog collapsed to the ground. Phylog spat blood again. It was obvious he had taken a lot of damage. Bros fell beside him. He couldn't resist the king. Gil put his sword out and held back Finir's powerful attack. He was the only one who was able to resist the king. The beast-like barbarian who watched the battle marveled at the strength and power of his king. He did not hide his joy that soon people would die at his hands. Jill took a deep breath as he steadied himself. He thought that Finir had terrifying power. He had not yet figured out how he would defeat him. Gil turned to his comrades to see how they were doing. Hearing a positive answer, he was calm for them. A lot of questions were brewing in his mind. What kind of power was this? How could he defeat it? Gil was beginning to doubt the success of the task. All three of them were standing and thinking how to defend themselves and attack the king. They were trying to regain their strength to stay alive. They heard a terrible laughter that filled the whole cave. The king stood and laughed at them. He couldn't believe that he was being attacked by such weak people. They were like insects to him. He could easily kill them. But his expression changed dramatically. He became serious and told them that they were bugs, just weaklings. He was going to play with them a little more before he killed them. After the king finished his speech, he just disappeared again. No one noticed where he disappeared to. His speed was phenomenal. Gil was all tensed up to the max. He didn't understand where he disappeared to. He thought that was the king's ability. He noticed that the king had decided to attack them from his hideout. Bros was the next to be attacked by the king. Before he knew it, Bros was facing a huge king who, with one look at him, could just tear him to pieces. The king didn't use his abilities. He hit Bros with incredible force. He didn't want to kill him quickly. Bros bent down and spat blood. It looked like his ribs were broken. The king had done some serious damage to him, but he didn't want to kill him quickly. But then Bros decided that the king was very close to him, and this was a great chance for him to strike back. The king effortlessly stopped Bros's blow. He grabbed his arm. Bros cried out in pain, but the king only laughed. He was enjoying the slow kill. Bros didn't want to give up. He wrenched his arm away and tried to counterattack him with his leg kick, using his elemental power. The king was surprised for a moment by Bros's courage and bravery, but he was completely confident and saw what Bros wanted to do. But he decided to act faster than him. He headbutted Bros with all his might. He got ahead of him, thus protecting himself from his blow. Bros felt a terrible pain run through his entire body. He no longer had the strength to attack the king. Finiar stood over Bros's exhausted body. He was ready to finish him off. The king had had enough of him. He stepped on Bros with all his might. There was no practical chance of his survival. The force of the king's blow was extremely high. Philog watched as the king stomped Bros. He couldn't believe that his friend had been killed by a monster. Out of desperation, Philog screamed. When the smoke and fog cleared from the king's blow, he saw that Bros's body was gone, and he was still alive. The king was confused. He didn't know who was so fast. Gil managed to save his comrade who was on the verge of death. He put him on the ground and watched what the king would do. Philog had already run up to them and saw Bros's mangled body. Gil told him to take care of Bros. Bros woke up and apologized to him for letting him down. He was going to get up again to fight the king. Gil was calm and determined. He told his friends to leave this monster to him, and he drew his sword. He was sure he could overpower it. He was going to finish it off. Jill was going to avenge the king for the men he had killed. The king sat and prepared to kill them all. He turned to them and said that they were just an appetizer to him. He didn't see them as equal fighters. Gil watched him and wanted to see what he was up to. Was he going to use the same trick he had used before? Suddenly, the king lunged at Gil. He was going to attack suddenly and insidiously from behind, while Gil was thinking about his next attack. Finiar was already striking, but suddenly Jill stopped the king's attack with a chilling calmness, almost without straining. Gil was using a special gift he had gotten for killing the python. With the help of his fire gauntlet, he was able to stop such attacks. Looking at the monster, he told him that it may not have been able to counter his skills, but in strength and agility, it was not inferior to him. Gil's recovering companions were shocked that Gil could resist the monster king's attacks. It was something unbelievable. They had a chance to escape. Bros thought that if he had trained for another 10 years from still, he wouldn't have been able to defeat this monster. He was incredibly strong for him. The king emphasized that this was the first time the worm was able to resist his attack. It was getting more and more interesting. He raised his hand sharply, in which a small sphere appeared. Finiar prepared to attack Gil. The resistance was weaseless, thought the king. The monster directed a powerful stream of his attack at Jill that would end Jill. He thought he was a small bug that was bothering him. Gil saw the powerful attack coming at him. He wasn't scared or nervous. He put a block and the attack didn't touch him. Fighting off the attack, Gil told the monster to save his surprise for when he left him headless. He was eager to avenge the king for bullying his friends. Gil dispelled the king's attack and rushed to deliver his blow. Before the monster could expect it, he tried to strike him with his sword. Blow after blow, the guy struck the monster. He was defenseless. He didn't block. He took all the blows on himself. Gil thought he could deal with him faster than he thought. Gil chopped him down with his sword, and in the flurry of the attack, he shouted that it was for Philog, whom he had nearly crushed. He had done him great injury. The guy hadn't forgotten how the monster had taunted Bros. He was preparing one of his powerful attacks for him for that. Gil put into his blows all his anger. Gil used the Holy Strike to kill the king. He aimed all his power at him. This was going to end his reign. He managed to knock the crown off the monster's head. The attack was insane in its power. Gil thought he had managed to damage him. But Gil was wrong. The king distracted his attention with his crown and was already behind his back and almost grabbed him. Gil did not see the attack and did not react to it. He felt the danger approaching him from behind. He deftly turned around and attacked the monster with a lightning strike. Gil hit it with his attack. Everything around him shook. Rocks flew in different directions. A column of smoke rose. His blow was powerful in its power of destruction. The boy stood on the ground and watched as his attack hit the king. He added that this was for all the innocent people who had suffered at his hands. His comrades couldn't believe how powerful his attack was. Rashidler's mouth dropped open in surprise at the power Gil wielded. Gil's attack made this king even angrier. He wanted to get even with Gil for his blow. He was determined. The smile was gone from his face. The barbarian saw this and was frightened. He said that this was the king's power. Now they were doomed to die. But Gil thought differently. He became more confident after the successful attack and was not afraid of the king. He looked at him and thought that this was his praised strength, which he successfully coped with. Finiar stood scratching his head as he thought about which attack to choose. He had many attacks in his arsenal and couldn't choose the right one. The monster thought of which attack to use to kill Gil. A huge hammer appeared in front of him that could release the dark power of the king. Gil was in great danger. The games were over. Finiar ordered his huge pack of wild wolves to attack Gil. They rushed at him at breakneck speed, ready to tear him to shreds. There were countless of them. Gil did not let them near him and tried to make his attacks first. He needed great strength and agility not to be killed by them, but they continued to attack him with even greater force. While he was fighting off the pack, the monster had already made a new spell. A new weapon appeared in his hands. It was even more powerful than the previous one. The king didn't wait for Gil to fight off the wolves. He jumped high up and was already attacking him. The monster was very cunning and agile. Gil realized that he was being attacked from the air. He had to do something. Otherwise, the monster would reach his goal. The attacks were unpredictable for him. The monster was different from those he had fought before. Finiar, with all his might and all his strength, hit the place where Gil was. Each of his attacks was getting stronger. The king was showing his true power. The attack was unbelievable. Gil could have been killed by a direct hit from the king. Gil's sword flew out of the spot and stuck into the ground. It was covered in blood. The king didn't miss and hit Gil. Gil was alive, but he was badly wounded. His whole body was damaged. He had difficulty standing on his feet. His right arm was in a lot of pain, but he didn't give up and didn't run away from the battle. The king didn't stop. He was preparing a new attack on Gil. He was creating a monster friend to become even stronger. A powerful stream of energy was coming out of Finiar's body. Gil could see that the king was coming after him. He had never seen power like his before. Gil could not recover. His strength was running out. His body was not listening. He stood there unable to move. The king's attack was very powerful. The king took his perfect image. He was showing Gil his true power. The guy for one moment thought that for him it was the end. The monster moved with incredible speed. He became even faster and more powerful. His strength impressed everyone who watched the fight. The king would be sure that he had no equal. Finiar hit Gil and he missed the attack again. It was like a beating. Gil didn't have time to counterattack. It was getting harder and harder for him to fight the monster. Gil didn't have time to fall to the ground before he was attacked by the king right in the air. He gave him another crushing blow. He was on the edge of his powers. He didn't know how he could stop the king. He had to think of something urgently, or he would suffer the fate of the fallen men. The king didn't stop. He was dealing more and more damage to Gil. He didn't want Gil to be able to counterattack him. Finiar dealt Gil a decisive blow before he landed on the ground. Gil was completely shattered. He didn't have the strength to resist the monster's attacks. Gil was lying on the ground and couldn't move. He was bleeding. He heard the king approaching him. Gil realized that he would soon die a second time. The king used the spell again. He slowly approached Gil, instilling in him fear and a sense of imminent death. Finiar approached Gil. He told him that the useless insects must be destroyed so they would accept their fate of being killed by monsters. Gil couldn't answer the king. He had no strength left. The king's words gave him negative thoughts. If this time everything he believed in was coming to an end. But Gil didn't want to die like that. Memories of home, of his beloved girl, of Sally and Uba began to appear in his head one by one. He couldn't give up and lose to him. The image of his mom's face appeared in front of Gil. She was calling him to her. Her smile warmed the guy's heart. He loved his mom madly, and he was determined that he would see her no matter what it cost him. He remembered her picking him up from school when he was little. It was his mom who was the motivation for Gil to persevere, to get out of the game. Gilo's face was covered in dark matter. There was black smoke all around him. It was weathering the awakening of some power hidden within him. The bright light blinded Bros and Phylog. They did not understand what was happening to Gil. The barbarian behind them, hidden behind a rock, was very curious about what was happening there. A new, very powerful sword appeared in Gil's hands, not like the one his grandfather had given him. He raised it up and let the monster know that the fight wasn't over yet. Gil was getting stronger and stronger. His strength was overwhelming him. He had awakened a power unknown to him that had saved him when he was on the verge of death. He changed a lot. His hair became silver. He was surrounded by dark matter. What happened to him was not clear to anyone. Gil was silent and transformed. And an unexpected voice brought the guy to his senses. Someone was calling him, asking him to get up. Gil was scared. He didn't know who it was and what he wanted from him. Gil was high in the sky. It was as if he could fly. It seemed to him that he was in a dream and could not wake up. Anxious thoughts did not leave his head. He opened his eyes and looked around. He didn't understand what was going on. He had just fought a monster king. He wanted to know where he was. What was this amazing place? The land was like sea waves and he himself could fly. Everything seemed unreal to him. Gil looked at his hand. It was shrouded in a strange, white glow. He wondered if he was already dead and had fallen into the realm of the dead. A voice, unknown to him, which he heard from behind him, hastened to reassure him and told him that he was not dead, but Gil did not see the one who had told him these words. In front of him appeared a guy in a beautiful cloak. He was holding something in his hands. Gil wanted to find out who he was and why he was in this strange place. The guy turned to Gil. He wanted to tell him about everything that troubled him. He wanted to calm him down so that Gil would not do something stupid from misunderstanding. Gil looked at him in surprise. He wanted to know who he was, how he knew his name. Gil had a very surprised look on his face. The mysterious guy gave him an answer that gave Gil goosebumps. He told him that he didn't know who he was, and it was true. He didn't know how long he had been in this place. Maybe it was 1,000 years or 10,000 years. He had lost count. Gil was excited by the stranger's answer. The stranger tried to reassure Gil. He had heard a voice once that told him that one day he would be taken away from there, but he didn't know anything else. He looked at it carefully and was relieved to say that it looked like that moment had come and Gil would free him. Gil was angry at not understanding what was going on. He couldn't understand what the stranger was talking about. Gil had just asked him to tell him how he could get out of this strange place. He stood there hoping that he would show him how to get back out. He had to fight on. He couldn't leave his friends in trouble, but the stranger just asked Gil to agree and then there was silence. The stranger got down on his knee and asked Gil to become his master, which amazed him even more. He didn't know how to react to what was happening. He stood in front of Gil, bowing his head, his voice telling him that only the one he would ask would be able to leave this place. It was for this reason that the unknown man had asked Gil to become his master. He recognized him, and it was time for him to leave this place. Gil had agreed to the stranger's terms, to become his master, and now he had to get Gil out of this strange place. They shook hands as a sign that all the conditions had been met, and from now on, Gil was his master. During this handshake, amazing things began to happen. Their hands began to be covered with unknown magic. Gil was excited. After a moment, Gil was once again standing in front of the Monster King, who was preparing to attack him. It was as if Gil had never disappeared. Gil watched the monster carefully. He was really back from that place. That uncle had not deceived him. Now he was going to continue the fight. The guy felt an incredible energy that spilled over his entire body. Whether it had something to do with the fact that he had agreed to become his master was unknown to Gil. He managed to awaken the element of chaos, but what it meant Gil did not understand yet. He did not fully understand his characteristics. Gil was charged with victory. Now he had a new element and a new weapon. That uncle who appeared in front of him must have been the embodiment of the element. Gil liked the new sensations. The king of monsters saw Gil and was confused. It just couldn't be true. After such attacks, he was completely unharmed. He looked at him, and it looked like he had become stronger, and now it would be difficult for him to kill him, with the new power awakened in him. Because the power of the element had been triggered, JL's skills would be strengthened, and he had also reached the destruction skill. The power of this skill, activated by Gil's health, the attacks of this element could break through any defense. Mastering this power, Gil could defeat the king of monsters. Also, the power of the element unleashed a weapon for him, his sword, which increased all the characteristics of the wielder. Gil looked at his new sword carefully. He liked the true shape of the sword. It was beautiful. Previously, it didn't give Gil any special stats, but once he reached the power of the element, the sword unleashed its power. Now it was time for Gil to carry out his attack. He didn't think long. He ran to test his new characteristics and skills in battle. But the king thought that he couldn't match him in strength just because he was able to awaken his element. Gil didn't listen to what the king was telling him. He continued his attack. He approached him and struck him. He broke through his defenses and shattered his mask. He managed to damage him. Finiar got up after Jill's attack. He didn't take much damage, but Jill hurt his ego. The king immediately rushed to attack. He couldn't lose to this worm. It was impossible for him. There was no point in holding back now. He was going to crush this insect once and for all. The monster tried to make his attack, but Gil was faster and counterattacked it with his new technique of explosive slash, which hit the king. Jill didn't stop at one attack. He continued to chop him with his sword. Finiar couldn't believe that Jill was able to damage him. There was only one thing left for him to do, to destroy the monster king once and for all, to avenge him for all the innocent people. Jill dealt the king a fatal blow. His health was reduced by 90%. He had no chance of surviving Jill's attack. Jill won. He successfully destroyed the Sunil boss. For killing him, he got 40,000 experience points, thus increasing his level. He also successfully completed the mission he came to this place with. For this, he got 500,000 experience points and leveled up once again. He got one treasure chest, but he didn't know what was in it. Grandpa Ubby and Boban were working together in the vegetable garden like they used to. The weather was beautiful. The sun was warming their backs as they worked. Grandpa Ubby admonished Boban that if he had volunteered to help, he should have worked harder. Boban tried to justify that it had been a long time since he had worked at this pace, and he was just used to it. Sally was sitting under a tree in the shade eating an apple. She was worried about Gil. It had been 3 days since he had left. She was waiting for him to come back. Grandpa was worried too. The time he had given him was up. He was ready to go looking for him if he didn't come back soon. A very loud rumble distracted them from their work. They were tense. They didn't know what was going on and thought they were being attacked by monsters. A strong wind blew. They could barely stand on their feet. No one could understand what was happening in their city. But everything ended abruptly, just as it had begun. Boban looked at his grandfather, who took off his hat with sadness on his face. Boban wondered what it all meant. Sally came running to them. She was scared for her grandfather and came running to see if he was okay and what had happened. Neither she nor Boban understood anything. Ubby explained to them that it was the energy waves that manifest after destroying high-level monsters. The source of the wave was coming straight from their lair. With a serious expression on his face, Grandpa added that it was likely that Gil had awakened the power of the element and killed the monster king. The energy wave was still coming out from the dead body, the defeated king, for a long time. It possessed everyone that the monster had killed. The barbarian looked at the wave and was shocked. His king was killed by a boy according to the wave. He couldn't believe it. Philog. If he hadn't seen what was happening with his own eyes, he would never have believed that such a powerful man even existed. He was in admiration of Gil. Bros marveled that such destructive power was unleashed literally in an instant. It amazed him. He looked at Gil and speculated if he could have just been hiding his true power all this time, keeping it for the very last resort. Jill stood there and still couldn't believe that he had defeated such a strong enemy, but what scared him more was the guy from the dream who had helped him get this power. He said that Jill was his master. He didn't know what his words meant yet. The guy stood and thoughtfully silent. He was thinking about the guy who gave him the power. He did not talk to his comrades. He was resting from the hard fight. Philog was incredibly happy that they had survived the ordeal. He rejoiced at the victory. He called out to Gil to see if he was all right or if he needed help. Gil turned around. He was fine, but his comrades were badly injured, so he left them in the same place and went to free their comrades. He called Rashidler to help him find those they had kidnapped and held in this place. The terrified barbarian immediately agreed, and now Jill was his boss. Gil won, but he was not satisfied. He still had a lot of questions. Who was the man in the dream and why he suddenly appeared? He wanted to find out if it was an accident that he got into the game. The guy thought there was someone watching everything that was going on, but he didn't know how to find him. Gil felt that something was wrong with him. Gil was lifted up. All his black matter scattered to the wind, as if something was pulling him out of this dangerous place filled with monsters. The portal pulled Jill back into the city. Grandpa Ubby caught Jill, who had passed out on his way back. Jill saw him, and in a weak voice called his name. He was too weak. He needed to regain his strength. Jill faintly added that he had accomplished his grandfather's task. He had defeated the king of the monsters. He woke up lying on the bed. He heard someone calling his name and asking him to wake up. He opened his eyes, but could not understand where he was. Gil turned his head and saw a familiar face. She was telling him it was noon. How long was he going to sleep? It was time to wake up. He couldn't believe it when he saw the face and heard the voice. Barely holding back tears, Gil saw his mom. He thought he had come home from the game. His mom, smiling at him, leaned over and told him that she had already made him a breakfast he loved. Tears flowed from Gil's eyes. He jumped up from his bed, all in tears, rushed to hug his mom. As he had never hugged her before, he was insanely happy to hug her. Gil held her in his arms and cried. He told her that he missed her incredibly much. He didn't want to let her go for a second. But a sharp voice brought Gil back to the game. A rough voice asked him what he was doing. Gil didn't realize what was happening. He opened his eyes. Tears were still streaming from them. Jill, confused, saw Boben standing in front of him, who looked shocked and didn't understand why he was hugging him and crying. Jill, embarrassed, sat down on the bed and as if nothing had happened asked him what he was doing here in the first place. Boban was a little freaked out and asked him why he had hugged him so abruptly. Both guys were puzzled. Boban explained why he was in Gil's room. He promised the old man to take care of him. He wished him a speedy recovery so he could fight him again. He went to leave with his rough weather. He told Jill not to hang around until he brought Grandpa Ubi and Sally. Jill watched silently as he followed them. Jill, sitting on the bed, realized it was a dream. He didn't remember how he got back. He remembered Grandpa Ubi and nothing else. He had a terrible headache, as if someone had hit him with all their might. Gil wondered what had happened to Bros and Phylog after he came back. The system reminded Gil that he still had an unopened chest in his briefcase and no points had been distributed. Gil thought it was the treasure chest of the Monster King. Gil remembered that for defeating Bohan, he had gotten a key. He could use it to open the chest to see what was inside it. He received from the system a complete list of what was available to him and what he had accomplished by killing the Monster King. Gil also received a legendary hidden item that interested him a lot. He wanted to see what was inside as soon as possible. He opened the hidden item and was greatly surprised. He didn't expect to see what was in the hidden item. In front of him was a large egg. Gil couldn't believe that the legendary item would be an egg. He could just eat it. He didn't know what else to do with it. The egg began to crack. Something was hatching from it. Gil thought it might be some kind of animal. The egg was almost broken. A little baby hatched out of the egg, which caused a storm of emotions for Gil. For him, it was something fantastic. He looked at it and couldn't believe that the legendary object would turn out to be a baby. He completely stopped what was happening to him. The kid saw Gil, and with absolute sincerity was overjoyed. He called Gil his daddy. That's exactly what the kid thought. He jumped on Gil and started hugging him while repeating that he was his daddy. Gil didn't know how to handle the kid. Jill didn't understand why he was calling him daddy, what the kid wanted from him, and why Jill got him and considered him legendary. A lot of different thoughts were in Jill's head. The kid was playing and Gil wanted to understand what the kid was there for. He thought about finding a clue on the menu, but there was nothing there. Gil didn't know what use he could be. He was just a kid. The child was having fun rolling around on Gil's bed, who stepped aside with a puzzled face. He didn't expect to see a child when he opened the chest. He tried once again to go into the menu and recognize what the baby was for, but he didn't have the powers to recognize living things. Now the baby was attached to Gil. This didn't please him and made him a little angry. The baby crawled all over Gil wherever he wanted, all the while calling him daddy when he was on his head. Gil didn't stand out and yelled at the baby. Gil calmed down and pulled himself together. He didn't know how to handle the baby, and he didn't know what he wanted him for. He held the baby by the leg upside down. He repeated to him that he was not his father. Besides, he couldn't be with him all the time because it could be dangerous for him. Gil looked the baby in the eye and told him that he would ask Grandpa or Sally to take care of him. When Jill was telling the child this, he noticed that something strange was happening to him. He had seen other children change their behavior when they were not happy. The child didn't like what Gil was saying to him, and he began to scream and cry with all his might, expressing his displeasure to Gil. He cried harder and harder. Jill didn't know how to calm him down. He just asked him to calm down and stop crying. Jill had no experience in childcare. Jill received a notification from the system that, for abandoning a living creature, he would receive a 30-minute punishment that would begin in 10 seconds. Jill didn't even have time to realize what the punishment was or how it was activated. The seconds flew by one after another. When the time was up, the child began to glow intensely as if he was a portal, and it was sending him to fulfill the punishment. Jill covered his eyes with his hands. The intense light coming from the child made him realize what was happening to him. Jill looked out from under his arm to see what was happening. He saw an even brighter light that filled the room. The baby carried him to a place unknown to him. Gil looked around and saw snow all around him. He couldn't even guess where he was. The baby was sitting on the snow and crying. Gil leaned over to him and tried to comfort him. He promised him that he wouldn't leave him. He was just a schoolboy who didn't know how to take care of children. Jim heard someone's ominous and violent growling behind him. He turned around to look at the monster. He saw two monsters in front of him. They were predators of the snowy fields, level 40. They had huge horns on their heads. They were huge monsters. Gil saw them and couldn't understand what picked up meant. It was something new to him. He hadn't met such monsters before. He was tasked with destroying all the monsters in 30 minutes. If there was even one monster left alive, they would attack him again in double the amount. The kid had to stay alive. Gil was shocked when he heard about the assignment. If a child died, Gil died with him. He had to protect the child from the monsters. The monsters, not thinking long, began to attack the child. When he saw them, he was very frightened, but they were determined to finish them off. They started to attack the child, but Jill managed to cover him with his body and picked him up in his arms. Jill set the child down in front of him and promised him that he wouldn't die today and to stay close to him and not move away. He drew his sword and activated his elemental power. He prepared to complete the task and destroy all the monsters. Gil transformed into his power and was absolutely ready. He took the child around his neck and rushed to attack. Grandpa and Boban were walking home. Ubby asked him how Jill felt when Boban went to see him. He was fine and full of strength and energy, he answered the old man in a confident voice. Boban wanted to know from the old man how the companions they were looking for to go in search of the temple were doing, but no one wanted to go with them. Everyone in the town was frightened, thanks to the tales Hicks had told them. They were sure that they would incur the wrath of the gods, and their peaceful life would be destroyed. Boban was angered by the old man's words. He didn't want to look for anyone, and he didn't want to go searching with those who were. He didn't understand why they were going through all this trouble. The old man tried to talk some sense into him, and told him that the monsters on their way were much more dangerous than he thought. The old man didn't want to risk their lives for nothing. He suggested he go to Gil. He would tell him all about how dangerous it was for them outside. Grandpa saw Sally coming back from town. She said hello to them and wanted to know what they were talking to Boban about. The old man told Sally that Jill was awake and could be visited. It looked like Boban had taken good care of him while he slept. Sally's eyes lit up. She wanted to see him as soon as possible and find out what elemental power he had awakened on his mission. She grabbed her grandfather's hand and rushed with incredible speed to Gil's room. She was very excited. Boban stood and watched as they made their way to Gil's room. He felt a little bad that he had been forgotten about, as if he wasn't coming with them. Gil was killing monsters, one by one. With his new power, the monsters didn't give him much trouble and he was able to kill them with ease. He was unstoppable. His speed was prohibitive. He did well, killing all the monsters. An unharmed child sat on his neck. Jill was a little tired. He had not yet fully recovered from the hardest battle with the Monster King, and this task had tired him out. The happy child, when he saw Gil, put his hands up and happily called him Daddy. He was safe now. Nothing threatened him. Gil didn't realize that he was now seriously supposed to be his father. He thought the worst was yet to come. After successfully completing the mission, Gil and the baby returned home. He was glad to be back. Gil hollered. Now he could rest easy to recover further. He needed some rest from the fights. He sat down on the bed and wanted to put his sword away as Sally came running into the room. When she saw that he wasn't alone, she froze at the entrance to the room. She looked at them and couldn't believe her eyes. She said something quietly, but Gil didn't know what she was talking about. Sally didn't hide her surprise. She wanted to know who the child was and how he had ended up with Gil. She ran up to them, grabbed the baby in her arms, and was very happy. She liked the baby a lot and was crazy with happiness. Sally asked him what the baby was and where it came from. She remarked that she was a pretty girl. Gil explained to her that the baby had hatched from an egg, but Sally didn't believe him. She thought he was joking. She had never heard of babies hatching from eggs before. He stood there thinking that this could hardly be true. He couldn't refuse or give up this child or he would be punished again. He didn't understand why he had to go through all this. Boban and Grandpa Ubby came into the room. He asked Sally why she was being so noisy. She could be heard from the other village what had alarmed her so much. Sally happily showed them the baby that Jill had brought. She thought the baby was cute and proceeded to squeeze and hug it. Grandpa and Boban were greatly surprised to see the baby. They couldn't understand where Gil had gotten it from or what it was for. They were in a stupor. Boban hadn't seen her before when he was taking care of Gil. Who was she and where did she come from, he wondered, furrowing his brow. Jill decided to jokingly say that she was climbing under a mole. He didn't know how to explain to them that the baby came from an egg. After some thought, he decided to tell them that he had rescued her from a den of monsters. Grandpa said that Gil needed a good meal, and after lunch they could talk about it. Sally leaned over to the baby and told her to behave while her big sister made her a yummy treat. Leaving Jill's room, Boban decided to talk to Sally and offered to be his girlfriend again, but was firmly refused. The little girl walked up to Jill, grabbed his leg to get his attention, and pointed to her mouth, hinting that she was hungry. Gil saw that the child was hungry. He asked her to wait a little longer while her big sister made a nibble. Standing in the doorway on his way out, Grandpa Ubby apologized to Jill, much to his surprise. Gil looked at him and asked why the old man was apologizing to him. He didn't know what he was guilty of. The old man replied that he was careless and couldn't have guessed that there would be a high-level monster inside the cave. He could have died there. Gil hurriedly consoled the old man, saying that it wasn't his fault. He went there on his own, willingly, voluntarily. If it wasn't for this mission, he would never have understood everything the old man was talking about. Besides, he had a feeling that he was there for a reason. He told his grandfather what had happened to him in the battle with the king. that he had found himself in a parallel universe where he had met a man who had asked Gil to become his master. He had agreed because it was the only way out, and that when he came back to reality, he had already mastered the power of the element. It was as if it had been planned in advance. Gil looked at the old man and asked if everyone who possessed the power of the element had to go through the parallel universe, or if he was the only one who had gotten into it. Grandpa looked at him and said that he had never heard anything like that. The power of the element had never transported anyone, anywhere. It was amazing to him. This power, the element of chaos, the old man had once read about it in ancient books that spoke of events thousands of years ago as a power never seen before. Gil wanted to know what else those books said. He was sure they must have answers to his questions. The old man began to tell him about an ancient legend that thousands of years ago a devilish deity, Murius, fell upon mankind. He destroyed everything in his path. Mankind had no chance to survive. His power was so great that there was no other option but to surrender, which all of humanity was against. But when people plunged into the depths of despair, a hero named Hesiod appeared. With the power of the element of chaos, unseen before, he was the first to be able to resist the evil. Hesiod gathered an army and was able to overpower the devil deity, sealing the soul of Murius for long and agonizing years. He was able to defeat Murius. Hesiod was strong, possessing incredible skills. Mankind had never seen anyone stronger than him before. However, the price he would pay for sealing him was that he himself would be sealed. Gil assumed that that man from the parallel universe was Hesiod, who found himself sealed there forever. Grandpa Ubby replied that if he had really gotten the power of the chaos element, then, and the old man stopped talking as if he didn't want to scare Gil. But after a while, he said that the man he met was Hesiod. Gil's emotions were all mixed up and he didn't know how to react to his grandfather's words. Sally appeared on the doorstep. She called out to them, then asked what they were talking about, but she had come to invite them to the table. It was time to eat. Grandpa turned to Sally and with a smile on his face said they were on their way and were finishing their conversation.